I'm Andrew Basiago, and this is The Quest for Truth.
And my name is Aaron Moriarity, and I will be your moderator. And Andy, we're so glad to have you back. Of course, Andy, you know him well. He's the time-traveling chrononaut who's been to Mars, and he knows all this stuff. But today, we want to focus in on one of the biggest questions that comes up, and that is, why would the Defense Advanced Research community use children in their programs?
Aaron, that's a very critical question. And it's a question that's been asked many times, these 20 years, when I've given about 500 interviews originating in 15 countries and lectured really all over the Western Hemisphere about my time travel experiences in DARPA's Project Pegasus. So I think, sort of in prescript, to explain why use children in time travel, we have to go back a tick to World War II and ask a more fundamental question first, which is, why time travel? Why try to achieve time travel? The genesis of Project Pegasus originated in World War II when the Nazi Navy began chaining military ordnance to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And as a result, something that was later described as the Philadelphia experiment was attempted during World War II. Now, we recall that Nikola Tesla, who three of the project principals on Project Pegasus, my late father Raymond Francis Basiago, the Navy Lieutenant Carl Jack Pruitt, who would go on to become the research director of Project Montauk in the 80s, and Dr. Robert Beckwith, who was on Project Pegasus and went on to found many of the important discoveries, find and originate many of the important discoveries of the computer age, expressed to me personally the debt of gratitude that Project Pegasus owed Tesla. Now, Nikola Tesla died on January 7th of 1943. He left back in his papers, his voluminous papers, a particular set of plans that read energetic array. By August of 1943, realizing that he had left plans for teleportation, they attempted something that has come down in sort of folklore as the Philadelphia experiment. The ship did not involve the USS Eldridge. It involved a ship called the Martha's Vineyard. It did not take place in Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, but in Long Island Sound. The individuals that were at the captain's mast were not Tesla or Einstein or John von Neumann, as has often been alleged, but J. Robert Oppenheimer and Edward Teller. There were not multiple sailors fused in the hull of the ship, but one sailor who, when the ship was brought back in time-space, was impaled on one of the columns of the splash cowling in the front of the captain's mast. The ship was not taken back from its port at Norfolk, Virginia, but at Newport News, Virginia. And it wasn't an experiment into radar invisibility. All of those facts I've just shared were part of the Office of Naval Intelligence's cover story. The real Philadelphia experiment was into Tesla teleportation. That's why there was such a huge electrostatic discharge from the hull of the ship. Now, my father, Jack Pruitt, Bob Beckwith, they were always talking about the Philadelphia experiment when I was on Project Pegasus from 1968 to 72. So that was really the genesis of time travel in the defense technical community during the war. Now, after the war, what happened? July 1947, the Roswell incident, where they certainly knew by then we were being visited by extraterrestrials from elsewhere, or perhaps not extraterrestrials in spaceships, but as I'm often fond of saying, interdimensionals in time ships. In other words, not visitors from distant star systems, but maybe inhabitants of dimensions very close to our dimension, but elsewhere in the multiverse. Okay, so then 5 years later, in July of 1952, there were 9 extraterrestrial craft, or interdimensional craft, if you will, that were seen over our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. They were photographed, and those stories made the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post. And that's how my father and other distinguished electrical engineers, physicists, mathematicians — my father was both an electrical engineer and a brilliant mathematician — and, physicists and inventors like Bob Beckwith, Navy men who had ambit over time travel because the Navy had been responsible for what was over the physical, maritime time horizon. And so the Navy was given ambit over time travel, what we were seeing over the time horizon, if you will. So all that was coalescing from 1952 forward. And it really began to blossom in the mid-60s with Project Pegasus. Project Pegasus was not a CIA project, as some publicists in exopolitics have falsely claimed. It was a DARPA project. There were Army, Navy, DARPA, LANO, Sandia, and just Defense Department engineers like my dad. There was a huge variety of American personnel on that project. Now, it was true that after finding things out about the future, there were certain what I call pipe smokers on the project, like John Alexander McCone. Mr. McCone became the director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1960 and held that position in 1964. So when I entered Project Pegasus in 1968, I had frequent contact with McCone. I also had frequent contact with a name that I'm sure all of our listeners tonight would recognize, Donald Henry Rumsfeld. Mr. Rumsfeld was the defense attaché to DARPA's Project Pegasus. So in other words, he was the liaison between the Pentagon and the Department of Defense and people on the project like my dad. Now, when I would discuss what I did in Project Pegasus with my late father in the late 1980s, shortly before his death in January of 1990, he said, "Son, the primary reason," and by the way, before I go into that, let me just mention that in addition to my father, Jack Pruitt, there was an assistant to Jack Pruitt named Galen something, Galen. I don't have his last name, but that may show up in government files. And I mentioned Dr. Robert Beckwith, but I would be remiss if I also didn't mention Dr. Harold Agnew, who I did speak with in the year 2000, and Dr. Edward Teller, who I also met on the project, but I never had a later meeting with before he died. Those 5 or 6 individuals gave me a very clear picture over many decades of why they had used children in time travel. And it was a decision made in a very thoughtful way at the upper reaches of the U.S. defense technical and intelligence communities. Now, Aaron, the first reason was we were experimentees. So I think the natural question is, Andy, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Experimentees.
Right. What I mean is that when I said, Dad, why did they even involve we children in that project? He said, and this was when I was in my late 20s. My dad was in his late 60s, and this was in the late 1980s. Beginning around 1986 and continuing really to his death in 1990, we had many heart-to-hearts about what we had done together in the program. In fact, you may recall in 1989, he asked me to tell the story of Project Pegasus, and when I asked why, he said, because, son, we were involved in something great. I mean, the derivation of time travel. We did it. No other country, no other people known to have inhabited Earth. And so what he said was DARPA wanted to test the responses of you children to those technologies. So, I've captioned these 5 reasons under just nonsense words that allow me to remember these 5 bases of decision, these ratio decidenda for why we were involved. Now, borrowing from Harry Lorraine, and Jerry Lucas in their book, The Memory Book, the sort of nonsense word I made up for the first category was experimentees. Now, I think the natural question is, the commonsensical question is, well, why experimentees? Well, look, if they were going to be Tesla teleporting the president or the vice president or the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense to another country, another continent, quickly, virtually in a completely time-urgent way, because after all, when I was going between New Jersey and New Mexico, Woodridge, New Jersey, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's a distance, Aaron, of 2,005 miles, and we were getting there in several seconds.
Wow. Okay,
so they knew they were going to be using it for executive branch officials, like how do we send the president to Reykjavik, Iceland, to meet with Gorbachev and not get tired with jet lag by flying across the pond, as it were, the Atlantic Ocean. And what they realized is, wait a minute, if we're sending executive branch officials via teleportation, their wives or husbands, in the case of Hillary Rodham Clinton, possibly, and the executive branch officials who are married and have children, their wives and kids are going to be going with them, and their staff members, maybe even their kids. So we need to know the effect of these technologies on children. So we weren't really guinea pigs, because certainly with my group, they had already tested the technology on a group of essentially street urchins from other countries. And they negotiated with their governments to bring them up to the United States and involve them in these new, dangerous, experimental, technical experiments. And if they survived uninjured or survived at all, they were then given everything they would have not received in their home countries, like parents, clothing, food, shelter, education, employment, and were essentially then marshaled out of the programs. In other words, there was a sort of a Faustian deal that the American government made with other countries to bring their poorest of their poorest children to this country. Now, I was not in the first group of Navy enlisted personnel who teleported. They asphyxiated when the Vordal tunnel that was opened up was too long and they ran out of air. The second major group were those street urchins from other countries. I was not one of them. I was a lucky kid from a stable, sufficiently affluent, loving, providing, church-going family from Morris Plains, New Jersey, my father's family. And bless their memory. And the wonderful family I was born into. That was a life blessing for me. And so I was in the third group of American children from bright, stable, church-going, sufficiently affluent families who had gotten everything I needed to develop with a strong mind and a strong body and a strong heart. And thank the Lord for small favors. I did. And yet they had to test it on kids like me, because that's usually what the kids of our chief executives are. Look at who they've been. They've been remarkable young people. Virtually every president's children have been remarkable. Maybe that's because there was something special about their parents. I would like to think so. So anyway, we were the experimentees, so they could say, hey, Ray, Jack, Bob, Harold, Edward, talking about these 5 I mentioned. If we teleport children with these technologies, this is what will happen. But then they realized, well, wait a minute, we have other reasons to involve children.
Other reasons. Now, before you get to that, we got a super chat from Charlie Zander, and he has a sub question. Maybe we can sneak this one in quickly.
Okay.
And get right back to the main question about why children are used.
Right.
He asks, can Andy talk a little about the conversation that he had with Tony Rodriguez about his 20 and back experience seems important for the truth movement.
No, that's not germane to tonight's discussion.
Okay.
And I'm fairly certain that, unfortunately, Tony is in the second group of Mars claimants and secret space program claimants who I do not believe. So I don't want to vitiate true history, what I've been sharing, with somebody who I believe has virtually demonstrated that he is not sharing true history. He may be sharing true beliefs. I'm holding my assessment of Tony's work in abeyance, but I must say that we can't keep returning to the false thread in this area and preserve true history. So I am offended by the suggestion, and I would just urge everybody to step back and realize that there are three things that the U.S. intelligence and the military intelligence community seeks to conceal. And they are the existence of certain classified programs and projects, who was in them, and what technologies were either used for or developed in those programs. So we can't be so focused on today's claimant, the one who has written a book or is starting to be booked at conferences, to say we shouldn't study true history and realize that some claimants in this area have been telling the truth, and some have been a mix of, many have been a mix of opportunists seeking commercial advantage, fantasists suffering delusional disorders, and, I'm sorry to say, government operatives spreading untrue history, falsehood. And so that would be my answer. I'm not condemning Tony. I spoke with him at length for about 3 hours, and I am doubtful about his ultimate veracity. But now that I'm legally blind, unfortunately, I can't read his book. I'm going to try to have either an audio book or somebody read it to me. But I can tell you that there has been a spate of false claimants, and I don't think it's fair to me as somebody who has demonstrated the truth of what I've been saying. In fact, next week on July 21st, on the Quest for Truth, I might as well announce it now, I will be sharing 10 pieces of hearsay evidence and 10 pieces of what the law calls direct evidence or actual evidence, evidence that is admissible at trial that prove my claims. I have proved my claims. And so, frankly, in regard to the super chat, is it fair to me when people are still saying, oh, Andy hasn't proved his claims, and I have proved my claims, to answer people whose stories I haven't even been able to evaluate yet? So let's step back and kind of avoid that pattern.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not fair to me. And it's not fair to the other individuals who have been telling the truth, who have come forward and been attacked. In the area of the secret space program, the five gentlemen who I know went to Mars include myself, and I was blinded, William Whitecrow, and I'm fairly certain he was assassinated, Ken Johnston and Bernie Mendez, who were given memory problems, and Brett Stillings, who was given forms of mental imbalance. All of them undeserving because they served our country by going to the Red Planet via a new, dangerous, and experimental technology, the so-called aeronautical repositioning chamber, under the direction of a very still quite alive Howard Robard Hughes, who died not in 1976, but in 2001. That has been demonstrated to me by a retired Air Force general. And I would also note that I have brought forward 4 of my fellow astronauts who I was trained with and on the surface with. And I would beseech all of you to ask that of the emerging claimants in the area of time travel. For example, the individual who generated Apex admitted that they were all just stories, short stories about time travel. And in the area of the secret space program, we have a group of claimants who even claim 20, 40, 60 years worth of 20 years and back, and they can't name a single comrade or colleague on the moon, on Mars, on Ceres, okay? And they make a variety of other false claims that I will be contextualizing in my appearance before the Secret Space Program conference in Silicon Valley, California on September 16th and 17th.
Awesome.
So please just let's step back and not be hyper-focused on this spate of Secret Space Program claimants,
Right.
because they're not doing the same thing
Right.
that those of us who have really been involved in time travel
Right.
and really gone off planet for our country have already demonstrated. And they're just sort of stealing our thunder and making stuff up. But anyway, that's what's going on. I hate to be viewed as a negativist for framing that argument, but it's the truth. Doesn't the truth movement have to be devoted to the truth rather than folklore, rather than science fiction fantasy?
And I think, you know, for anyone watching or listening to anyone you're interested in their story of, and you want to ask them a question about something they were involved in or someone that they knew or mentioned. I mean, here you have Andrew D. Basiago. He's given so much facts, so many facts, dates, addresses, people, everything,
comrades,
and
colleagues,
witnesses. So, you know, there's a million questions that I even still have, and we talk a lot off the air. There's a lot of questions I still have, and none of them have to do with other people, that they have to do with your specific experiences. Like, you know, what did it smell like?
That serves a good function in ufology, in exopolitics, in the emerging literature of the Secret Space Program, however it pans out. And I'm not saying I know the truth. Look, a couple thoughts about historiography and true history. First of all, absence of evidence does not connote evidence of absence. So, for example, if somebody fails to share any name of a comrade with me, we can say, well, that's a threat to the validity of their claims, but it doesn't mean they didn't have comrades. Maybe their memories were suppressed. Maybe they forget. Maybe it was so long ago. I mean, I time traveled for the government 50 years ago. It's a miracle based on the memory that I was gifted with at birth, that in my book, Once Upon a Time in the Time Stream, I'm going to be listing about at least 25 project participants. Also, in the emerging literature of the Secret Space Program, I came forward and received the first person eyewitness testimony of 4 of my colleagues. But just because somebody doesn't do that, I can say, okay, I'm suspicious that they're not telling the truth. But you can't prove absence of evidence. You can't prove evidence of absence based on absence of evidence. The other thought I would share is something, in fact, that was said by the rather wise individual Donald Henry Rumsfeld, who was not an ogre. He was not a villain. He was just an all-American guy that my dad and I knew on the project. In fact, I have several personal memories about Rumsfeld that I'll be sharing in my book that demonstrate what a neat American he was, a neat person. He once said, "We know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know." And that's why I'm not becoming the hierophant, the judge and jury of the Secret Space Program. All I'm saying is, look, beware. There are 2 threads here, and I think I've detected what those threads are. So anyway, let's think about that and just step back and say, okay, Andy's on his podcast now. What can we ask about Andy's experiences? Because if we ask me about Tony's experiences, which are certainly Tony's right to share, and I welcome that use of the First Amendment freedom of speech and press and assembly, as it were, what we do is we engage in crossfire. Crossfire has contaminated ufology, exopolitics, the discussion of time travel, let's say the crossfire between me and Al Bielek, and indeed the whole area of what's called the paranormal, which in fact includes the parapolitical, the parascientific, and in fact, much of it, emergent truths that were concealed by the world's governments. I mean, science fiction was invented as a literary genre to conceal things that were actually emerging. Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein, 2 of the greats of science fiction, had desks next to each other at British intelligence during World War II. Okay, so like I said, let's just step back by focusing on a particular claimant's discussion at that time, so we can understand what they're saying thoroughly. But by the way, one question I would have for Tony is, Tony, I'm going to be discussing my molestation at age 5 by a physician attached to Project Pegasus.
Wow.
I attacked that gentleman severely by biting him and putting a huge gash in his male member. Okay? Now, I shared that not to discuss molestation, but because of that incident, my father explained to me that it was the right thing because I protected all the kids in the program. I had essentially engaged in a heroic defense of my child chrononauts on the program. It would have continued to be molested by this evil physician if I had not done so and revealed what he had done to my dad and the program. Had my dad, Jack Pruitt, and Paul Weber from Project Pegasus not gone over and practically killed this evil physician. And as a result of that entire incident, I was selected to go as far down the rabbit hole of applied quantum physics as any of the 140 American school children born roughly around 1958, 59, 60, 61, 62 in Project Pegasus. So my question to Tony Rodriguez would be, Tony, what is the relevance? How is it germane to your experiences in the secret space program that you were a so-called sex slave on Earth before going there? I don't see the connection initially, but then again, Tony, I haven't read your book, so please forgive me if I missed something. But those are the kind of questions with a view to true history that I would urge all of our listeners to begin asking of all claimants in these related areas of emergent truth. So anyway, second reason.
Second reason why they use children. Now, can I make a guess?
Sure.
Going back to your experience of making your blocks float, you did them because you thought they could or they would. And so a child's mind is not so used to failure. You think you're going to be able to do something, and you probably will because you believe in yourself. And that maybe that will help.
Yes. All right. And see, this shows how the emergent truth works. I've discussed that as recently as my podcast with the Honorable and gifted Dr. Michael Sala. And I mentioned that. I mentioned the fact that, look, when I levitated my alphabet blocks and my brother's Tinker Toys and Lincoln Logs on the floor of our rec room in New Jersey when I was 3 years old, my father witnessed that. He had a BS in electrical engineering from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which still has the world's leading electrical engineering undergraduate program. And he couldn't believe what his number 3 son, his youngest of 5 children, was doing. I was not only levitating those toys, they were spinning around each other like planets in the solar system, like planets going around the sun, and moons going around planets and so forth. So I have speculated, I think with some high probability, that he then turned my name over to the Department of Defense. Because look, from October of 1952 forward, my dad was in our response to the ET presence around our planet by building the metal alloy by which the ramjet would be built to chase the ET craft away from our planet. So not just 9 years later when I was born, but 12 years later when I was 3 years old, 1964 or so, 12 years after 1952, and the overflight of our nation's capital by those 9 ET craft clocked at traveling 7,000 miles per hour at Langley Air Force Base and teleporting, blinking out and blinking back on and around the heavens above the Capitol. My father clearly was in a need-to-know position with the Defense Department and undoubtedly went to his colleagues and said, "You're not going to believe it. My youngest son, Andy, my youngest child out of 5, can levitate. Maybe we should bring these kids into the defense effort. Maybe, for example, they'll be able to tell us how the ETs are hovering in those lenticular craft. Maybe they'll be able to connect with the ETs." So I would add to this list something that Aaron has just added. In addition to experimentees, we were, in a sense, psyches. We were psy kids who were being brought into the defense industry. But number 2 on my list, I prepared for tonight's podcast, was we were not only experimentees, but we were necessities. Okay, clearly they wanted to experiment primarily for the executive branch and their families on the Tesla teleportation. When I say we were necessities, what do I mean by that? Okay, the chronovisors were developed by Father Pellegrino Ernetti and Father Agostino Gemelli in the 1940s at the Catholic University of Milan, where they were studying Gregorian chants, and they were using a specialized microphone to split the voices in the Gregorian chants to study sort of musical, spiritual issues like why Gregorian chants have certain religious effects, certain healing effects. And they made a small modification to the microphone, and something Gemelli's father had said to him in childhood. And they thought, oh my God, we have a window to the past. So they got with Dr. Enrico Fermi, one of the world's leading quantum physicists, a participant in the Manhattan Project, the mentor of Dr. Harold M. Agnew, the director of LANL, who became the director, or federal science administrator, if you will, of Project Pegasus. And they said, okay, how do we turn this flat-screened sort of television image of a past event into literally a hologram that we can use to visit the past? So they gave it to the Navy of the United States, the Vatican did. They gave it to the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy gave the technology to DARPA. DARPA gave the technology to Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey, but 15 minutes from where I was growing up in Morris Plains, New Jersey. And by 1970, they had a chronovisor that was a cube of light on a stage. It was propagated by a crystal array, an 8-sided bismuth crystal, or an 8 crystal array on the ceiling, and this cube of light popped out on the floor of the chronovisor, the floor of the stage that it was propagating on. But when adults were used, they found that their voices, their breathing, the sound of their footfall, if they coughed or sneezed or laughed, they were too big, and the hologram would collapse. It would go on the fritz like an early picture tube and collapse. So they thought, okay, we've got 2 choices here. We either use gifted and talented school children, or we use small humans, basically midgets. And they decided on the former, on gifted and talented school children. I was one of those G&T kids. That's been proven, again, by Dr. Sala. He has found me listed in previously secret government documents identifying America's G&T students.
Really?
Now, how did that begin? That began with Project Talent, which was begun by Admiral Hyman Rickover, President Jimmy Carter's mentor, at the Navy in the late 1950s, when he wanted to identify young Americans, basically American kids, of exceptional IQ, psychic ability, and leadership potential. I scored amazingly high on the first 2 and high on the third. I don't know whether I'm going to be president. I was just told that in 1980. But I scored very high IQ and very psychic. I could literally see things behind an opaque blind and say, that's what you're holding in your hands. Okay, so why use kids? The second reason is we were necessities. If they were going to use chronovision to visit the past and visit distant locations in the present, and ultimately distant locations in time, space, and what we call the future, the first said test of which occurred on November 5th, 1971 at ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey. That's where I had my famous meeting with Art Bell, when Art was a 25-year-old technician there. as recorded on the interview he did with me on 8/14/15. The very interview with Art, when she said, Andy, I believe you, man, because there's no way you could have been in that building or even known I was in that building unless you were in a classified defense-related research and development need-to-know capacity. Those are the only people, adults and children and young people, who were let into that building, man. So you were doing what you said. You were working for the Defense Department, just as I was. And that entire interview, I believe, is still up on YouTube. So I would urge everybody to go to Art's interview of me on 8/14/15, not for Coast to Coast AM, but for his later network, the Dark Matter Digital Network. That was one of the great Art Bell's last interviews with anybody before he died or was assassinated. I don't know which. I suspect the latter.
Wow.
And Art deserved that interview with me because I was able to connect his past to the emergent time travel capabilities of the U.S. government, something he did dozens of shows about. And I think that was a sort of a karmic payoff for the great Art Bell. But we were necessities. They had been testing teleportation, and the second major defense technology was chronovision, and they needed little humans to work with chronovision at all. As Rumsfeld had said in that meeting I had, the other kids met with Rumsfeld under the Cerrillos Cultural Center in the intelligence community meeting room underneath the Cerrillos Cultural Center in Cerrillos, New Mexico. He said, the primary purpose, children, of the teleportation is that it is military. It'll allow us to put troops precisely where they're needed on the battlefield. We found when we analyzed World War II that the majority of American deaths and injuries occurred not on the front lines and not in the rear areas, but between the two, when they were often shot by friendly fire accidentally from behind. So if we, if Palestinians invade the Dome of the Rock and Israel asks our army to go in there, our Green Berets or some other force to go in there, our Marines, we want to put our troops precisely where they're needed on the Dome of the Rock, rather than be shot getting to the Dome of the Rock. Okay, so Rumsfeld explained, now there was also a similar defense application of chronovision. If they could go forward in time, which they ultimately tried during that November 5th, 1971 test that I was a participant in, and was quite challenging. That's where we went forward in time for 30 minutes and then looked at the Supreme Court building and then were pulled back for a half hour and were debriefed by an LCDR from the ONI. And he said, okay, Andy, what did you see? And I said, I saw the building under 100 feet of brackish water. There was even algae on the columns. And we were later told it was the year 2013, and it was the U.S. Supreme Court building on the Mall in Washington, D.C. Now, by going forward in time with chronovision, what were they trying to do? Were they trying to create a chronography that would rule the world and exploit free men and women through owning time travel, through controlling time travel? Were they trying to blow up the world? Were they trying to oppress other people around the world? No, I knew these gentlemen. They were honorable, patriotic Americans like your fathers and mine, the guys next door, the guys down the street. They were, our teachers and our cops and our firefighters and our garbage men, et cetera, of that era. They were good Americans, most of whom had served in World War II or the Korean War. And what they wanted to do with time travel is know the threats that would come in the future so they could prevent those threats, so that they could achieve survival and peace in a nuclear age. I continued to work on that cause for years. For example, as a protege to Norman Cousins of the Ban the Bomb movement. I just announced on the Quest for Truth that finally, after 50 years, mainstream ufology is embracing the truth of the fact that our post-war extraterrestrial visits were primarily motivated by the ETs being concerned that we were going into space and detonating atomic bombs. We've blown up over 2,000 nuclear weapons on Earth. The problem, and the reason why that was cosmically stupid and cosmically harmful in a stupendous, utterly negative way, is that nuclear explosions destroy the physical substrates of time-space, of the universe. So, for example, every explosion where the shock wave and heat goes out, dark matter is thrust in the opposite direction. Because for every action in the quantum hologram, in time-space, there is an equal and opposing reaction. That's one of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Okay, so we were not trying to create a chronarchy to enslave or to take people's freedoms away. Project Pegasus was trying to save humanity by preventing a nuclear war. Okay, but kids were a necessity in that. And individuals like my dad, who had served in World War II in France and Germany, and had seen children who sadly and completely unfairly had been killed by World War II, they thought, well, if I don't volunteer my child into this program, if not us, who? If not when? How? In the words of Dr. King. So my dad said, well, if not my son, then who? And if not Andy, now when? So he volunteered me into the program. That was a decision he made, and I'm happy and proud that he did, because he had faith in me that I would time travel and not go crazy. I would bear up in a way that shows that children and adults confronted with anything in time-space can deal with it, and I did. In fact, I went on to an illustrious future. So anyway, the second cause, Aaron, second reason for involving children in time travel was not that we were experimentees per se, we were necessities.
Okay, necessities. All right. Well, so what's the third? Now, what would be the third reason?
Aaron, the third was what I call, my nonsense word for that area was we were viewees. Now, this wasn't shared with me by my father, but by Jack Pruitt and his assistant Galen, whatever his last name was, I don't know. But Jack or Galen talked about the fact that they knew from their studies of sort of social psychology and the study of human perception that when adults see something, their perceptions tend to be colored by the selection pressure of what they have already seen and experienced. In the case of children, children are what's called tabula rasa. They are blank slates. They tend to see what is really there. And I know it was Jack Pruitt who used the example that when children, when adults are in the year 2200 and they see somebody go by with a holster on their belt, it's actually a scientific implement. The adults would come back to the present and say, yes, I was in 2200 and I saw these people in Los Angeles with these pistols on holsters that they were wearing, on their belt. But then the kids would be sent to the same place in time-space and would say, I was in Los Angeles in 2200 and I saw people walking around with these holsters, and in those holsters was something that looked like a slide rule. In other words, children's perceptions of what they were seeing, what they were viewing when time traveling, were considered inherently more reliable. So they were using us as what I call viewees. We were seeing what was really there rather than that what we presumed or concluded was there falsely, because we were just sort of, adults will quickly look at something and say, oh, that person's a scumbag, or that person's got a pistol in his pocket, or, blah, blah, blah. They reach these conclusions that are made too preemptively and too presumptively, and they don't see what is really there. How many times have we had that experience with adults? You're trying to help them, and you're vilifying them. That's been happening to me for 20 years, bringing true history forward. I've been vilified. Excuse me, baking soda. Aaron, I've lived an honorable life, and I've extended the honorable service I gave our great country with honorable service to the American people and the people of the world by sharing true history, and by some I have been vilified. That's what adults do. They don't reach the right conclusion. So we found that we could rely on kids to see things as they truly are. And by the way, regarding that point you made about psyches, I want to write that down before I forget. Children could also read people better. Remember how that was when we were kids, Aaron?
Oh, yeah.
We would go by one adult and we'd say, I do not trust that person.
Yeah.
That person is something, a criminal, a creep, a child molester, somebody bad. And yet when we would go by benevolent adults, we would think, I'm going to tell mom to let that lady babysit us, okay, because we could trust them. So part of being a viewee, I believe, was our ability to remotely view or just psychically read not only humanoids, but other humanoids and animals we would be meeting while time traveling. I mentioned how we were sent to the time of the dinosaurs in 100 million BC, and we had to kind of calm down and remember what Jack Pruitt had told us, that he was sending us to the time when there were no meat-eating, no carnivore dinosaurs. There were just herbivores or plant eaters. So we didn't have to worry about being gobbled up by those dinosaurs. But yet we had to read them when they were running past us shrieking like velociraptors, you know. So I'm sure that part of being the viewees was just having the keener sort of psychic, emotional seeing ability of children, their insight into safe and threatening people and animals and conditions. Yeah.
Well, I would imagine also they don't have an agenda. The kids don't have an agenda, whereas the adults might have. They might be wanting to see something that proves something they think is going to happen in the future. Or like you said, when they saw the image of the future of people with cell phones on the street, they said, why does everybody have walkie-talkies? Right.
Yeah. My dad saw everybody talking on cell phones. And when I asked him in the late 80s about what he saw of the future, he said, yeah, mobile phones, I think they were being called at the time, like the time of what, McGraw Cellular. Cellular phones are going to be a big deal. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, because we saw all of you walking around with these little tiny phones, like little walkie-talkies. So they were trying to map the future. They by no means had omniscience about the future any more than by flying to New York City and getting off at JFK gives you omniscience about everything that has or will happen or is happening at that time in the Big Apple. You just see what's right in front of you, what's on the news. So that was one of the things they had mapped about the future, was the advent of cell phones. In a similar way, they used the example of, seeing people in the future with something in a holster on their belt, and the adults all said, yeah, it was a gun, handgun. And the kids said, no, it was some kind of scientific instrument, like it was reading the atmosphere, or it was some kind of calculation device or something.
Interesting. And didn't your father look into the future and see .com and thought maybe the communists won the war? Some future war?
Yeah, he was having a discussion with John Alexander McCone, one of these pipe smokers. He had been, as I mentioned, DCI from 1960 to 64, and they called him Alec, by the way. Everybody in the project called him Alec, just like they called Don Rumsfeld Rummy. And by the way, that was one of the nice things that Rummy said to me. He said, no, Andy, call me Don. I don't want the kids on the program, including yourself, calling me Rummy, because I want to make sure they don't get involved with alcohol when they grow up. So just call me Don or Mr. Rumsfeld. And I said, rightio, Rummy. He kind of laughed. But you asked about the meeting with McCone. What was happening was McCone was explaining to my dad what the advent of the internet meant. I remember, and it was amazing, I was able to remember this. This is one of the reasons I was selected. He said, Ray, what the internet is the reduction to practice of Vannevar Bush's primary fundamental. Somebody will sit in front of a VDT, like a modern television screen, and will be operating a large keyboard like is appearing currently on our electric typewriters, but it'll be detached, have a cord. And through that primary fundamental, they will be able to communicate with anybody else in the world on the network. And my dad said something, well, Alec, what do these suffixes mean? And he said, well, .com means communications,
Org.
.edu means educational institutions, and so forth. And my dad said, how do we know that .com means communications, Alec? And he said, Ray, that's the network. They're communicating across the globe through this primary fundamental reduced to practice. And I said, I know that, Alec, but maybe it means the commies have taken over by then. And I tell that story not to disparage the memory of my late dad, because he was a brilliant genius of an individual, but it's just to show that they did not have omniscience of even the data points about the future that they were collecting. So how could they establish a chronography, an oligarchy of time travel control? It's not consistent with what was going on. They were not getting omniscience about the future. In fact, they were collecting, videos of chronovisor images of past events and just taping them on 16 millimeter tape and throwing them in canisters and dropping them in plastic back boxes. So they were like putting Paris, 1800, Italy, 1450,
Wow.
and so forth.
Wow.
And just storing scenes from the past. And that was going on to the pipe smokers to figure out what it all meant.
Wow.
But, so yeah, they knew that kids were better at being viewies. They were seeing things as they really were, not as falsely colored by the selection pressure of their own past experiences and perceptions.
Wow. Yes. So interesting. So that's the viewies. So what's number 4 on your list?
Number 4 is trainees. Now, because they had to use kids to use the chronovisors, because they knew when using children in all the 8 modalities of time travel that Project Pegasus had researched and was developing, basically had reduced to practice and was sort of testing on bright, healthy children from loving, stable, church-going families, many of them in northern New Jersey, or most of them. They realized, well, wait a minute. If we do train children from this age in time travel, let's literally make them trainees. And that's our next category, trainees. Let's make of them time-space cadets. And I was present when Donald Rumsfeld said to my father, when they were sharing a drink in a bar, he said, Ray, we're planning on sending the children on to the Naval Academy, Annapolis, after high school graduation. And from there, we will use their membership in the Navy as a pretext for involving them in future project experiences. Now, I had my meeting with my local congressman, Barry Goldwater Jr. of Woodland Hills, California, in my sophomore or junior year at Chatsworth High School in Chatsworth, California, out in the San Fernando Valley. And I stood him up. And Barry Goldwater Jr., Congressman Goldwater Jr.'s secretary called me up and said, do you realize, son, who you were dealing with? Mr. Goldwater is a congressman, a member of Congress, and you just stood him up when you were supposed to come over here and interview to be admitted to Annapolis. And I said, ma'am, I do not want to go to the Naval Academy and be yelled at in my face for 4 years. I said, I do not disparage my brothers in the Navy. In fact, I'm already in it. I became a lieutenant in the 3rd grade, but I do not want to go to Annapolis because I don't want to put up with being yelled at for 4 years. I don't believe in the military command structure where an officer tells men to charge that hill and he allows it to become a hamburger hill because they never should have taken that military objective. In other words, I believed in the whole Earth battalion, the full capacitation of our troops, an idea that has now come of age with the U.S. military. So we were expected to go on to the Naval Academy, and I stood up my congressman and didn't go. And those who have studied my experience have sort of marked my introduction into the truth movement as an advocate of true history when I essentially broke rank and refused to go into the Naval Academy to be involved in future time travel activities in adulthood. But what happened? I was put in Project Mars and brought into a program to go to the Red Planet via time travel in summer of 1980, and who was one of my classmates, 5 years younger than me? William Cameron McCool. Of what? Of the U.S. Navy Academy at Annapolis. Somebody who sadly would die aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia on February 1st of 2003. Willie McCool, Willie as we called him, was, knowing that he told us that because his name was McCool and he was at the Naval Academy, all we had to know was that he was cool. Willie was quite a character. Now, when he told his story, my dad kind of rolled his eyes because he's thinking, oh, geez, why couldn't Andy have taken that bit? That's where he was supposed to go. And now this fellow is making a joke about being cool for being at the Naval Academy. So anyway, that's where I was supposed to go. And I was told, I was given the identity of not a Navy lieutenant, but a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, which is the first intelligence level in the Navy, just like major in the Army. It allows you to read intelligence documents and receive intelligence training. I was then told by Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA and Dr. Eldon Byrd, B-Y-R-D. I believe it was Eldon Andrew Byrd, in around the year 2000, that because I had gone on after going to Mars, when I was, by the way, listed not only under an alias as lieutenant commander in the Navy, but under my given legal name as a special agent for the Naval Investigative Service. I had two sets of ID. That's how the intel community works. Everybody who is posted to a U.S. intelligence agency receives an officer rank in one of the branches of the military. Mine had been the Navy from childhood. And so Courtney Hunt and Eldon Byrd claimed that because of my 4 post-secondary degrees after going to Mars, I probably was promoted to commander or even something lower, like a rear admiral or something higher than lieutenant commander. But I have no proof of that, Aaron, because I ripped up my DD-214 and I've asked the Navy for it, and they won't even communicate with me. And I have my name all over their documents going back to 1969, and they won't even communicate with me. That's what they've done to all of us, including the late William Whitecrow. So anyway, we were trainees who were expected to go on to Annapolis later in life as a pretext for involving us in future time travel activities.
Wow, that's future time travel activities. Did they give you any idea of what those might be, or just dangled that carrot out there?
No, although there had been such a diversity of places, and what I call time places in time space, times and places that we went to, that I'm sure it would have been all over the map. I'm sure it would have involved more travel to the future that I had done in Pegasus, because after that trip on November 5th of 71 to the year 2013 to see the status of the mall in the U.S. Supreme Court building on the mall in Washington, D.C., the only other probe to the future that I remember clearly was the trip to 2045 a number of times to pick up data scrolls of events occurring between 1972 and 2045. And that one probe we did not by a Stargate, but by a chronovisor to 2010. that's where I think I interacted with the gentleman who became a brilliant country western star, Garth Brooks. And Garth has never come forward. Garth, if you are listening, we're not making it up. We remember that you, sir, were in this project, so please contact me through the Washington State Bar Association, and I will share with you any memories of your involvement in Project Pegasus that you may very well not remember, because all of the participants in Project Pegasus and Project Mars were subjected to memory suppression. But we were supposed to go on and be essentially the first generation of American chrononauts trained from childhood. I like to say with a bit of a chuckle that we began, all the kids involved in Project Pegasus and time travel began as remote viewers for the Office of Naval Intelligence. We were small mediums at large.
Yeah, I love that one.
I've also stated, yeah, thanks, Aaron. I've also used the phrase that we were time-space cadets in childhood.
Yeah.
Not military cadets, but time-space cadets, and that's indeed what we were.
Right. And for anyone that doesn't believe that the military would have kids, branches for kids, now I do know that, do you know what branch that babies serve in the military? They serve in the infantry.
I don't know, Aaron.
In the infantry, of course. That's my little,
Boom, boom.
that's my little joke. But
Aaron, you've got to get an agent to move forward with that career in comedy.
oh, you think so? All right. So that's so interesting. So that's your the trainees, time space cadets, bound for Annapolis in the future for future time travel. Even though you did,
right? And Aaron, I was dressed in this little white terry cloth pair of swim trunks and a swimming jacket when I was like 3 that had nautical life preservers and U.S. Navy emblems on it. And I have spoken to other classmates, even several of my law school classmates at Lewis and Clark up in Portland, Oregon, where I was a student from 1988 to 91. And they also had the same sort of early shaping experiences as if they were training people from earliest childhood to be in one branch of the service or another, like they were taken up in planes at a young age, or like I had my head dunked in water at around age 2 to learn how to swim underwater. And even before I worked for Captain Cousteau, although I never scuba dived for him or got on the Calypso, which was my life stream, I did reach the stage of writing for Captain Cousteau under the direction of his son, Jean-Michel Cousteau, an equally great individual. But oddly, or interestingly, I had been set on that nautical path that had so many ramifications in my life when I could just about walk, with a little swim jacket and swim trunks with the life preservers and a U.S. Navy emblem on it. So maybe that was because they had said to my dad, Ray, your son Andrew is the great-great-grandson of Ferdinand Maximilian of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We see here how he was Secretary of the Navy while in his early 20s. So maybe Andy, being his great-great-grandson, is headed for a naval career. Let's begin programming him for the Navy. I remember, for example, during the first year of Project Pegasus in 1969-70, we were taken to a U.S. Navy submarine at anchor off of Perth Amboy on the New Jersey coast. So they were sort of bringing us along in the Navy. And even beginning in 1969, I and some of the other boys in the program had to learn to identify U.S. Navy vessels just based on their outlines, on their silhouettes, as it were. So we were doing remote viewing for the Office of Naval Intelligence. We were learning how to identify silhouettes of U.S. Navy ships. We were visiting submarines at anchor in Perth Amboy and having other nautical training experiences. And this isn't in the 10th grade when I was told to apply to Annapolis, the U.S. Navy Academy. This was in the 3rd grade. So this was the nature of the Cold War. And let me mention something about that before I go to the last of the 5 reasons why children were involved in Project Pegasus. In addition to that history of the Nazis chaining ordnance to the bottom of the Atlantic, after the war, I started to describe how the 2 defense threats to this country and the free world were basically the Reds and the Grays. My father and his colleagues were often sort of privates during World War II who were then made majors in what was called the Second Reserve. The Second Reserve was sort of a 5th column that would step up and become our mainstream political and military leadership if our mainstream leadership was captured or killed by the major threat of the Reds that our government was concerned about and still is. Basically the threat posed by the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, the communists. We were in a war against the communists. That's what the Cold War was. What did a famous Cold Warrior, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, say at the LA Coliseum while accepting the Democratic nomination for president? That reveals that why he never gave a secret society speech, but a speech about the communists, the Soviet menace, as it was called. JFK spoke at that speech of the former Soviet Union as a matter of being enemy campfires burning on distant hillsides. So we have to contextualize true history, what was going on at that time. If we just look at what's right in front of us by the next person to come along, we don't contextualize true history. We engage in an error in historiography, which is known as a presentist analysis. Okay, so we were in a Cold War with the commies. That's why my dad said in regard to the dot-com craze of the 1980s and 90s to John Alexander McCone, the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. How do we know that, Alec? Maybe the dot-com means the commies have taken over by then. Okay, so the reason that children were used at all is, look, we were in a Cold War with the communist regimes in the former Soviet Union, the rest of Eastern Europe, and also primarily the People's Republic of China. They were worried about the Chinese taking over the Japanese islands, the Korean, and then the Pacific coast of the United States. Something that my sources in the intel community and the military tell me is still a goal of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, not to buy our country or live in it, but to own it, rights, title, and interest. Okay, so we have to be students of true history so we can be understanding our present situation. And so that's why they wanted to create this cadre of child chrononauts, because they were locked in a Cold War with the communist world. What did JFK say at Berlin? About 16 days or so after his June 10th, 1963 speech at American University. At American University, he talks about what kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. And then 16 days later, he goes literally to the gate of the Soviet regime, the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and shouts at them, we don't have to build a wall to keep our people in. I mean, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a great American and a great president, and he gave his life for our survival and peace in the nuclear age against estimable enemies or potential adversaries. And so how could I have not served in Project Pegasus as a son of my father? I mean, he had served in the Atlantic theater of the war at age 19 and had to, guard German POWs. He had to set the limbs of American parachute troopers who had broken arms and legs and backs parachuting into France and Germany. He had to console French and German women about the death of their children. So he thought, well, if we're going to save the world, and also we're going to be traveling in time, I'm going to do what people have done throughout history. I'm going to put my son on my back and take him into the new world. He even explained that to me, that that's what he was doing. That when, in all time, when adults would have to take their tribe to happier hunting grounds or a better island to live on or a better continent, what would they do? They wouldn't leave their children behind. They would put their children on their shoulders and take them with them. And so my dad was simply doing that by taking me into the time-space age. And what did we end up doing? As a father and son, we ended up reaching the first planet beyond this planet to be visited by Americans via a quantum access device, the aeronautical repositioning chamber. So we were trainees. We were time-space cadets.
Andy?
Yes.
Oh, you went blank for a second there. I don't know if you stopped talking.
Yeah.
So what's number 5?
Number 5, it's actually number 6, thanks to your provision of the concept of psyches, or gifted and talented kids who would not disbelieve what they could do, or they didn't know what they couldn't do, as it were. Mm-hmm. But what I call sanies, what my father explained, this was one of my conversations with my late dad in the late 80s, is that when they would involve adults, like let's say young adult Navy enlisted personnel in time travel, those individuals would frequently go crazy because they couldn't cope with the fact that the time-space hologram that we find ourselves in is essentially malleable. It's not only malleable, and different timelines can be accessed with different devices, but it is really the fulfillment of a concept first introduced by the American psychologist Henry James, psychologist and sort of physiocrat Henry James in the 1880s, which is the concept of the multiverse. They couldn't understand, for example, why if they sent the same person or a different person to the same past event, it always changed a little bit. So, for example, when they sent me to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. on April 15th of 1863 with the express mission of seeing who shot President Lincoln, did he shoot himself? Was it his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, perhaps because he was having an extramarital affair? Was it Major Henry Rathbone, perhaps because he was suffering from PTSD as a Union soldier from the war, who would later go on and murder the woman sitting right next to him, his girlfriend Clara Harris, who became his wife, and then he shot her? Was it John Wilkes Booth? Was he shouting "Sic Semper Tyrannis" when he jumped from the balcony? Or was he shouting something like, "She has shot Father Abraham"? Okay, or something like it. Or some Latin term he was using to honor President Lincoln. All we know is that Booth apparently went up there to sign an autograph for the president because he was sort of the Robert Redford or Paul Newman of his era, the most handsome, famous actor in the country, and the younger brother of the two older Booth brothers, Junius and the other actor, brother of John Wilkes Booth. So John Wilkes Booth was a tremendous celebrity during the Civil War period, as was President Lincoln. So it's believed that they were actually just meeting to swap autographs. That was another reason why, which was a tradition then and now. As you got with President Clinton on that T-shirt, and I think that's great, and it's just part of Americana, right? Mm-hmm. And so there were all kinds of other explanations for the Lincoln assassination. He had Marfan's syndrome, and he may very well have been dying of cancer. He was having an extramarital affair. He was prone to depression since he had broken up with his first girlfriend, Anne Hutchinson, when he was a young man. That's why he had that grave look in so many of his photographs at midlife. I mean, Lincoln was shot when he was 56. And Mrs. Lincoln was angry at him. She had mental problems, just as was portrayed by the great Sally Field in Steven Spielberg's great film Lincoln. You know, she'd be just sprawled out on the floor and going into some crazy paroxysm of some mental disorder, some fit, and she would try to reason with Mary Todd. And then there was the questionable mental state of Major Rathbone. And there was the lack of any evidence regarding Booth, except they knew that those who were hanged for the plot to kill Lincoln, Mary Surratt and Azeroth and the rest of them, Thomas Powell, who also used the name Thomas Paine, they were pretty much indicted simply because they had been in a rooming house that Booth had stayed in Virginia. And in fact, when Mary Surratt's son escaped the country as to not be fingered in that conspiracy theory who had shot Lincoln, and they were really abusive to those defendants. They had to wear these masks in 90-degree weather on the East Coast, and some practically perish in these masks that they were, these leather face masks that they were forced to wear during the trial. So John Surratt fled to the Vatican and became a Vatican Zoab. But when he came back to the United States and was arrested, guess what? He was acquitted. So we're fairly sure that when I was told to go back and see who shot Lincoln, the Department of Defense knew that the son of Mary Surratt, literally the only woman hanged as a result of that alleged conspiracy, had been acquitted. They also had the data, or the evidence regarding the mental illness of Major Rathbone. And also the fact that when that man was shot at Richard Garrett's barn in Virginia and alleged to be John Wilkes Booth, in fact, he was a redheaded gentleman with freckles, probably an Irish American of some kind. So in other words, we know that John Wilkes Booth was not killed in Richard Garrett's barn in Virginia. In fact, he showed up apparently in Ely, Oklahoma, in 1903. So there was both some kind of plot or spontaneous action to kill Lincoln, and there was a kind of accelerated legal proceeding to frame Booth. But they had all kinds of other theories of who shot Lincoln, and that was my job to go back and see in time space. Now, when I went during those 8 times in summer of 1971, before I then teleported back to New Jersey so as to arrive 50 minutes after I had left in the beginning of that summer of 71, there were only 2 times I even saw Lincoln in Ford's Theater. One was sitting on the balcony, and one was coming into the lobby of the theater. And it was John Boda of this country who said, "Andy, that makes perfect sense." And I said, "Why, John?" And he said, "Because the Lincolns came to the theater late that night." So I was being used as both sort of a viewee and a psyche. If we sent this gifted and talented kid back, what would he see? What would he tell us about the assassination of Lincoln? And I did, but the problem is I didn't see enough because the Lincolns came to the theater late that night, and our project didn't know that. But if they had sent, getting back to the St. E, they knew if they had sent an adult, and he thought, "Oh man, I can't deal with this. 8 different versions of the assassination of Lincoln. What does this mean? Did I really grow up in the same house as the ones my siblings did?" And all these sort of 7th level of reality type conundra about the time-space hologram in which we find ourselves, they were going insane. I think probably the individuals who jumped off the Martha's Vineyard, not the Eldridge, in what was called the Philadelphia experiment, which was really that Long Island Sound experiment, were probably freaking out from the electrostatic discharge. But if they had begun time traveling, they might have just been jumping into the water just to cool off, realizing, "Oh man, I'm seeing things in time space that I shouldn't be seeing. It shouldn't be like this." So in other words, time travel was having a mentally and spiritually deracinating effect on adult chrononauts. So they said, well, because we have to use them, they are necessities, and we're experimenting on them anyway. They're experimentees. Let's make them trainees, knowing that they'll be better viewees in childhood and probably in adulthood based on their childhood experiences. And then in the process, they will remain sane-y. So, Aaron, those are the 5 reasons why children were involved in time travel in DARPA's Project Pegasus.
So interesting. So interesting. Yeah, a lot of people think, well, why would they use children? Well, you gave such good answers there, reasoned answers. The one is,
I think it's a perfectly sound question, and I've answered it for years.
yeah.
And those are the answers that I've gone into my memory and been able to confirm that specific people in the program told me. And, this kind of shows the compartmentalized nature of classified defense-related research and development projects like Project Pegasus. Mm-hmm. My dad shared 2 of those 5 rationale. Other individuals like Jack Pruitt, his assistant Galen, who would sometimes greet us when we teleported to Santa Fe from New Jersey, and Robert Beckwith, as well as Dr. Harold Agnew and Dr. Edward Teller, they kind of gave other explanations to me when I was serving on the project. So when my dad looked back in 1986, 7, and 8, and told me about what we had done together in the program, 1968 to 72, we were reaching back a good 15 years. And he was just remembering what he had been told. And then I was able to piece together other more ancient memories in my mind from serving on the project. So that's the nature of true history. You have to interview as many witness participants as possible, and you have to write down what they say that they remember, because memory is a partial exercise. And in fact, according to the UC San Diego educated social psychologist, Dr. Jean Maria Arrigo, who is a distinguished scholar who has worked for the U.S. intelligence community and military on different ethical issues in intelligence and military affairs, a singular event in our lives is virtually impossible to remember. There's no linkage to other engrams of memory. So, for example, I had 1 contact with Sasquatch. I met 2, and then a day or 2 later, I played with a younger Sasquatch. But because that was a singular event in my life, for years, Aaron, when I would drive between San Diego and Seattle or just LA and Portland, I would say to people, when I got there, listen, if there's Sasquatch, I would have seen him by now, because I've been all over the western, the western side of the Cascades, and I haven't seen a peep of them. But I was forgetting that decades earlier, as a 5-year-old, in fact, a 4-year-old, 11-month-old boy, I had actually met 2 Sasquatch at Great Lake Sacandaga in the Adirondacks of New York State. So the reason I discuss that Sasquatch encounter is, look, none of us is fully in possession of their memory all the time. Like when I came forward on Mars, what did I talk about? My 2 acclimation trips in July and August of 1981. I was still discovering the memories, primarily through the good graces of colleagues who I connected with, William Stillings, Bernard Mendez, William Whitecrow, and Ken Johnston Sr. So that's something we have to remember about the emerging literature of the secret space program. As the claimants begin to link up dots from discussions with other participants, they should be able to name other comrades that they served with. And that has been very rare, if non-existent, in that second thread of Mars claimants that begins around the 2013 testimony of Randy Kramer, who was proven to be making up his account. And I'd rather not keep on harping on that,
right,
but I just resent that Randy was used to supplant a student of true history and an actual advocate and practitioner of the truth, namely Andy. And so I just urge everybody to be a little bit more circumspect about that fact that, look, if somebody has been in the secret space program for 20, 40, 60 years, shouldn't they be able to name some comrade that they had, some elder that was a scientist or technician working with them, some military officer that was consulting with them or giving them orders? I mean, like I said, when I published my autobiography, Once Upon a Time in the Time Stream, about my experiences in Pegasus, I'm going to name about 25 people who were in Project Pegasus.
Wow.
When I publish it, I will also be publishing the memoir of my Mars experiences. And I'll be naming about 35 people that we've identified that were in Project Mars and went to the Red Planet. Some are dead, some are still alive, and among those who are still alive, some have come forward and some have not. So it numbers about a third of that 35. You know, it's like about 12 truth tellers, 12 alive who haven't told the truth, and 12 to 15 or 20 who are deceased. But we name all those names. I mean, I've even lost the name of this individual who was monitoring 999 North Sepulveda when we were going there. But I even have William Stillings to thank for mentioning the last name of one of the psychics who would come into our classroom, one of the psychics who was going to be monitoring our presence on the Red Planet at College of the Siskiyous when we were training for Mars. His last name was Angus, like the bee, Angus. So Mr. Angus, I don't remember your first name, but if you're listening, please contact me. We want to validate the fact that we were trained for Mars at College of the Siskiyous in August and September of 1980, because even College of the Siskiyous has gotten into the false deep state game of lying and saying that we were spreading some modern myth or urban legend. No, we were trained by the Defense Department to go to the Red Planet at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California in August and September of 1980. William Stillings and I met astronaut Buzz Aldrin the day before our first class up at the auxiliary University Extension building for College of the Siskiyous in Wairika, California. And we believe that that meeting with Buzz took place on Sunday, I believe Sunday, August 18th, before our first class on Monday the next day. So we've linked up a lot of data points, as I said on a previous broadcast of this podcast, The Quest for Truth. We have the first name and the hometown of the then girlfriend of Major Ed Dames. So Major Dames, if you're listening, please call me. I will give you the name, the hair color, and the hometown in California of your girlfriend. How did I know that? Did we meet in any other context during those years? Okay, so we have data from the project. Just like we knew that the name of Barack Obama in those days was Barry Sotoro, and we have his kindergarten picture and record from Indonesia. I mean, it all links up.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what we were. We were Saint. They were relying on children in Project Pegasus and young adults to go to Mars because they knew we had more of a chance of remaining sane while involved in what's called time travel, but I prefer the term quantum access, essentially accessing other timelines, other dimensions in the quantum hologram.
Interesting. You know what? I have a vague memory of something else you talked about. The reason why they used children was because especially for the teleporting, was because there was a heart valve problem with the adults teleporting.
Well, that wasn't something that wasn't a priori reason for using kids.
Okay.
What they found decades later was that the adults who had been kids in the program were developing a disease that mimicked diabetes,
Okay.
which I did develop, and it cost me my good vision and my kidney function.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask that of playing a secret space program, how were you injured? This stuff was all experimental.
Yeah.
And they knew that adults who had teleported, like my father, were developing heart valve defects. And you can,
Right.
it's a matter of public record that my dad had a cuff, a robotic device in his mitral valve that was doing the work of his mitral valve, developed by the great father of Marlo Thomas, Danny Thomas, at his hospital. We have Danny Thomas to thank for that development, because it kept my dad alive for 13 years, where he otherwise would have had a massive coronary.
Wow.
Just as he did in 1990. So I and my father and I should say, out of respect, right? Honor thy father and mother. My father and I were both medically injured by the fact, or from the fact, that Project Pegasus was working with new, dangerous, and experimental technologies. And one of the mysteries of many claimants in the SSP is, okay, these technologies were still emergent, but the one we were using to get to Mars, beginning in the late 70s, was the aeronautical repositioning chamber. Why are you claiming you got there in space planes decades after that? Why would, for example, a recent claimant, Solomon Berg, tell the talented Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot that he was getting to other planets, including Mars, by blowing up nuclear weapons behind his space plane?
Wow.
Wouldn't that create a lot of destructive capability that might destroy his space plane?
Yeah.
So, they were using young adults in the arcs, again, probably because they needed a late teenager or somebody in their early 20s to be able to cope with what we were doing, going millions of miles in, 8 to 20 minutes, by having that weird morphing effect where the box-like elevator at 999 North Sepulveda turned into a cylinder, and then it opened up on Mars, and we were in the sub-basement of a U.S. facility. But at the same time, I'm sure they believed that, look, if we use teenagers, in the late teens and early 20s, their tissues will be more malleable. So maybe we won't have the metabolic syndrome and the heart valve defects or other failure of major organs from these very new, dangerous, and experimental technologies. But I'm here to witness to the fact that my father and I were injured. This has not been an empty exercise on my part. I knew in 2003 that I had this metabolic syndrome. I was briefed on it by the great Jack Pruitt at the old Sweeney Auditorium in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was later torn down. His son Glenn would die in around 2007 of that very metabolic syndrome.
Wow.
And Jack warned me in 2003 that this metabolic syndrome in all of the adults who had been child teleportees in Project Pegasus was a finding by the DoD. My dad had already died 13 years earlier with a robotic mitral valve in his heart because his heart valve had been damaged, just as Courtney Maurice Hunt of the CIA had told me happened to all the adults in Project Pegasus. And so, again, that's something that we can use to contextualize claims. These were emergent areas of the highest technology at the most secret levels of the U.S. government. They were not space planes. They were not the traditional view of the Philadelphia experiment, as told by Al Bielek. They were specific devices that did specific things in the time-space hologram, in what Henry James called the multiverse. Okay? And many of us were injured in one way or the other. I mentioned the boy, for example, who lost his feet teleporting to Santa Fe in 1970 because he landed in 3 inches of water in a public fountain. And then he slid out. His feet were cut off at the ankle.
Ouch.
And he slid off the surface of the water and fell on the ground, yelling, my feet, my feet. I'm only 9 years old. What am I going to do without any feet?
Oh.
So one of my fellow U.S. chrononauts in childhood lost his feet working in this program. So I can't believe all these claimants in the SSP who say, oh, yeah, I was going into space by a space plane for 20, 40, 60 years, and I'm fine. It's just not true. People even in the conventional space program were developing all problems of circulation, of balance, and other problems because of the fact that when you're on another planetoid like the moon or another planet like Mars, there is a different Schumann resonance of that different celestial body in the cosmos. And your whole biology is the product of thousands and thousands of generations of ancestry. And suddenly you're taken and put on another celestial body. It is not good for your health.
Right.
Even, who was it? I think it was Jim Lovell or Ed Mitchell, who had a major problem with his balance when he came back. Okay, Buzz Aldrin had those panic attacks when anybody would bring up the subject of being on the moon. Going into space and walking on the corner of Luna, as Nostradamus put it, or the red planet, as I speak of Mars, the Halloween planet, as Paul Goodwin put it, which is an apt description, was so deracinating, and the trip there was so nauseating, that when I was on the surface of Mars, I wasn't happy-go-lucky. I felt like I was in an extended nightmare. I thought, oh God, are we going to be able to survive these predators? Oh God, will my photo flash gun work if I have to shoot one of them? What do I do if one of my fellow astronauts panics? What if the jump room fails and I can't get home? What are they going to tell my mother and my siblings? Okay? Yeah. It was hellish. Yeah. And as I write at the end of the book, that which does not destroy us makes us stronger. So what did I develop in my 3 years and 1 month going to Mars? Spiritual strength. That's what we're all doing with everything that happens in our lives. We are growing our souls within the symphony of souls that we all are part of. And it was damaging. Just like the time travelers who were adults when they were introduced to it, they were going crazy.
Right.
They were losing their minds permanently.
Wow.
And the personnel on the project, like my father, was saying, geez, what are we going to do if we're losing so many Navy enlisted to suffocation and insanity and sudden death and suicide and other dangerous outcomes of involving people in new experiences in the quantum universe, as Michael Talbot put it.
Wow.
What you do is you train children from childhood, and just like the great Philippe Cousteau and Jean-Michel Cousteau, scuba diving from a young age under the tutelage of their great father, Captain Jacques-Yves Cousteau, they grew up not being afraid of being underwater. Do you realize how long some of those scuba divers spend underwater? If they start hitting the bends while they're surfacing, they have to remain suspended in the water sometimes for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Until the nitrogen levels in their blood balances out.
Yeah,
that's why I tried scuba diving and quickly left it. Okay.
I tried once too.
I got good on it as the Navy officer I was in Project Mars, but then I tried to get NAUI certified when I was writing for the Cousteau Society, and I thought, after I went down to about 40 feet off of Catalina Island off of the coast of Los Angeles, I said, this is not really my cup of tea. I want to breathe. I don't want to breathe through a register, through an oxygen,
right,
an oxygen device connected to tubes. I want to breathe.
Yeah.
Like my Creator God intended. I am not a fish. I'm a human being. So I left scuba. But that's the kind of choices we all make. But the bottom line is that, look, they had to involve children in time travel and late teenagers and young 20-somethings in Mars visitation because they had to use those people when they were young enough to not fear what they were doing and not believe in what they couldn't do, and in the process not lose their minds or their lives.
Right. I got another question. You have mentioned that when you were teleporting from New Jersey to Santa Fe, New Mexico, when you were in Project Pegasus as a youngster, one of the 140
Right.
school-age children,
Okay.
that sometimes you would spend the whole summer down there in Santa Fe and then teleport back to just before you left at the beginning of summer to spend that same summer again. My question is, so now there are two Andys, or whoever they're doing this with. Let's just say there's two Andys. What if one of those Andys dies? Could the other one still live, or did they ever talk about that, or the possibility of that?
Well, yeah, Aaron, if when I jumped to New Mexico and I died there, I would be a disappearing case on the original timeline, because my dad would have taken me to the hardware store in Florham Park, taken me to Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company in Woodridge, New Jersey, and we would have teleported, or we were teleporting to New Mexico. If I had died going there, or that summer there, I would be a missing person or an accidental death after having gone to the hardware store. In other words, the real-time understanding of my family members,
right,
probably even some of my neighbors, like Mr. Cunningham, great guy, Mr. Vedder, Mr. Connor. I don't know who else my dad told on the street. We would have gone missing upon going to the hardware store, because in fact we would have gone on to Curtiss-Wright, and then we jumped to New Mexico, and that's when we would have died. Now, we were told also that if we went back to our original timeline, which we were doing for those 4 summers, and we then asked our parents to vacation in New Mexico, would we see ourselves? And they said yes. So that would have been the version of ourselves on that epicycle created by being out there during that summer, and then going back to the beginning of the summer again and being in another location in time space, experiencing a second summer again. It's just like Groundhog Day. We were being put back in time upon teleporting back to New Jersey.
Wow, it just bends your mind trying to even imagine some of these scenarios.
Oh, and by the way, the Jack Pruitt, I know it was Jack. Jack trained us a lot. He was intrinsically, fundamentally involved in Project Pegasus, just as he was with Project Montauk.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably because the Montauk chair was so safe, because your body was always back in the chair, and that they were getting incredibly accurate data about the future. But Jack told us that if we did ask our parents to vacation in New Mexico, and by the way, we weren't living in Santa Fe, we were living in Albuquerque and then White Rock, New Mexico. Those 4 summers, the summers of the first summers of 1970, 71, 73 access from fall 71, and then 72. We first stayed in Albuquerque, and then we stayed those 2 summers in White Rock, New Mexico, the one I went back to with Governor Jesse Ventura on conspiracy theory.
Right.
And the lady who lived in the house we had stayed in 1973, and then 1972, had heard of Dr. Harold M. Agnew and Project Pegasus.
Wow.
Hello, non-believers. How did that happen? You can ask Governor Ventura. I didn't set up that interview. He didn't set it up. We just went to that house. And that lady came out and told us that she knew about Agnew, and she knew of the term Project Pegasus. How was that? So anyway, we stayed there first in 1973 and then in the summer of 1972, because we had jumped from fall of 71 to the beginning of the summer of 73. But anyway, we asked Jack Pruitt if after any of these summers we then go back to New Jersey and ask our parents to take us on a trip to New Mexico and these very locations in New Mexico, the land of enchantment. On that second summer on the East Coast, what will happen? And Jack said, you will see yourself doing what you did when you were here during that first summer, but we don't want that to happen because we're afraid if you touch yourself, the the curve of binding energy, I think it's called, in that famous book by John McPhee, one of my fellow Cantabs, one of my fellow University of Cambridge grads, in fact, a graduate of Magdalen College, Cambridge, as I was. Mm-hmm. I believe it was John McPhee who talked about the curve of binding energy. They were afraid that by touching ourselves between two timelines, there would be a local collapse of mass, I guess, or of energy, and there'd be a huge atomic explosion. So he even said, so you kids understand what your parents are doing for the second summers of these years. They're taking you on vacations in New York State, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Quebec, Canada. We're having you vacation away from New Jersey as far up into the Northeast as you can go, because we want to keep you away from the Southwest, not just away from New Mexico, because we want to protect you from an inadvertent explosion were you to not only see but touch yourself across two timelines. That's what I was told.
Wow, interesting. Interesting. So yeah, I don't know.
And by the way, let me salute Jack Pruitt and also the honorable memory of his son Glenn, because they were time travel pioneers, and they were also pioneering truth advocates by contacting project participants like myself and trying to protect them from a known medical problem directly attributable to our project experiences. That's an honorable American family. So I salute Jack and his son, Glenn Pruitt. And for that matter, his father, who were seen in a photograph, Jack Pruitt's father and himself, meeting with Nikola Tesla in the past, even though Jack was born in 1934 and Tesla died in 1943 when Jack was 8 or 9 years old. And in that photograph, Jack Pruitt was around 35 years old. So go figure.
Wow. Interesting.
When was somebody born in 1934, as Jack was 35? In 1969, when I entered Pegasus. Okay, people, so look for these evidential linkages in people's claims. Mine have all linked up. Why is that? Because I'm following the dictum of the great Samuel Langhorne Clemens, who used the nom de plume of Mark Twain. Always tell the truth, therefore you don't have to remember anything. Okay? I have never been rebutted because I've simply been exercising the truth principle. Share the truth, and you will never be rebutted. You might have an illusion of memory or misstate something, as you've talked about it 300 times on the radio, but that's not rebutting what you say. That's just the normal range of human error of memory or error of telling. When people make inconsistent statements, that's when we have to question and say, well, why don't their individual claims link up with other people's claims? You know, I'm saying that I entered Pegasus in 1969 when Jack Pruitt was 35 years old, having been born in 1934, and that's a matter of public record. Carl with a C, Jack Pruitt, Pruitt. Until recently still alive and living in Apto, New Mexico. Jack met with me in 2003 in Santa Fe. That was the last time I saw that great man. And he warned me about the metabolic syndrome that all the child teleportees were developing in adulthood. But isn't it interesting? Isn't it consistent? Isn't it telling, as we would say in the law, that Jack was 35 when I entered Pegasus in 1969, and Alexander Bruce and others saw the photograph of Jack and his late father, not Jack and Glenn, his father and son, but Jack and his father's, Jack's father, meeting with Tesla. Jack could only have been 9 before Tesla died. How could he be 35 and meeting with Tesla? That's proof of time travel right there. Now, who is Alexander Bruce? Chica, as she's called in writing and in the truth movement, is what? I believe she was a National Merit Scholar like I was in high school. She has a bachelor's degree in semiotics from Brown University, where one of her best friends was John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. And what is she today? the author of a series of brilliant books like Beyond the Bleak and Beyond the Secret and the Philadelphia Experiment Murders, Time Travel and the Politics of Insanity. And who is Chica Bruce today? The editor, the publisher of the brilliant website Forbidden Knowledge. Is that a journalist that we're going to rely on to say, I saw that photograph, and it featured Jack Pruitt and his late father meeting with Tesla, and Jack was 9 when Tesla died, and in that photograph, Jack Pruitt was 35 years old. Okay? So in looking at these disparate claims that are being made, we have to give weight to the journalists who have been devotees and scholars and committed to the truth, who have connected the dots. Another person who connected the dots on Bob Beckwith was not only myself, not only Alexander Bruce, but also R. Ken Thomas of Steam Shovel Press. As an ensemble of 3 journalists and colleagues, we did 4 major interviews with Bob Beckwith. My father had mentioned Bob Beckwith's name to me in the late 80s as one of the guys on the project. He said that Mr. Peeper's character, Bob Beckwith. Just today, I spoke with a retired engineer affiliated with the MUFON group in San Diego, California, a man 91 years of age.
Wow.
And he worked with Bob Beckwith.
Wow.
And he doesn't doubt that that's who I've connected to the advent of time travel in the American context. So just today, I made a connection to Dr. Beckwith from a man 91 years old. I mean, this gentleman is amazing. He's 8 years younger than my dad, so he must have been born in 1931, around the time that Don Rumsfeld was born. And he remembers working with Dr. Beckwith.
Wow.
And knows that he was a brilliant engineer, physicist, inventor, and mathematician like my late father. So look for this connecting up of the dots. Look for consistent claims that are correlated to other consistent claims. There's almost none of that in the secret space program.
Well, well, Andy, I don't know anybody that doubts your story. Everybody who I talk to, they want to hear more. They really admire your attention to detail and everything that you've remembered. And I gotta just say thank you to God for giving you such a good memory, because for the only guy who's come forward on all these top secret programs you were in, it surely is a blessing to have someone with a very good memory to recount it all for us.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I think, in life, we're all given gifts. As Desiderata says, there shall always be greater and lesser people than ourselves. So the key in life is to find what your God-given gifts are, make them your métier, and focus on one or several crafts. I mean, I focused on being a lawyer because I had a strong sense of justice, a writer because I had a strong sense of the English language and of general interest nonfiction and editorial writing and similar gifts, and on being a public speaker and a media personality. Just like Mr. Trump. As a media personality, I ran for president. Mm-hmm. I was giving hundreds of interviews about serving in 3 classified defense projects as someone with 5 post-secondary degrees, and Mr. Trump was the former star of The Apprentice. He won because he had something fundamental to being elected president in this great land: greenback dollars.
Yeah.
I have been always poor because after serving our great country, I was beggared of everything I was promised. I was cheated. Mr. Trump was allowed to become a billionaire by making those magnificent towers with his name on it. Mm-hmm. And he has, I think, encountered the experience that all chief executives do of trying to serve this country and then being vilified. We have to get beyond that.
Yeah, terrible.
Now, I don't want to really address the Trump controversy, but I know as somebody who ran and was vilified and had lies said about me. Look, everybody, You do not attack the home team. We have much bigger fish to fry than Mr. Trump or any American. We are in a fight for our lives against the Satanists, the Chinese Communist Party, the British technocrats, and the Zionists. Not the Jews, not even the Israelis, the Zionists. And as well, extraterrestrials who are not even coming here, but aliens among us, as the great Ruth Montgomery entitled her work about that subject. So let's stop attacking the home team. And as I said on the last episode, or broadcast as it were, of the Quest for Truth, what is that home team? That's us, Aaron, the human race. We are each a brain cell among 5 billion cells, and that brain is humanity. We are a symphony of soul. Just as they can vilify Mr. Trump with one claim or the other, he can also be credited with going to bat against some pretty evil faction. That's what I've done with my life and what happened when I ran for president. I was falsely accused of atrocities. My 100 proposals, my platform, was the most successful among the 1,500 Americans, men and women, running, described by 6 different pundits of American politics as awesome, brilliant, unrivaled, mind-blowing, genius in print, and a life experience to read. And how did the American cryptocracy embodied in mainstream media treat my campaign? By not interviewing me, even as I was being interviewed by the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, as a distinguished graduate of graduate school at the University of Cambridge, the 280th American to do so from Magdalen College, University of Cambridge, since the year 1428. And my friends across the pond, the great rank and file of the British people, not their leadership, not the British technocrats, but the mainstream British people, who I am so fond of after spending a year over there and wish to return to someday. The British mainstream journalists said, okay, Andy, you're a graduate of Cambridge, right? Magdalen, class of 1995, right? The 280th American to do so since the year 1428. But your proposal for teleportation, isn't that a bit daft? Okay? But nobody in the mainstream television establishment in this country honored and recognized what I had done for the country, how I had educated myself in this great country and in England, and qualified at the federal and state level into the legal profession in the state of Washington, one of our most progressive and modern states, one of our most excellent bars and benches and electorate. Great people in Washington. And our mainstream media did not cover my campaign. So I don't know if I'll have the privilege that Mr. Trump had and Mr. Obama and all the previous presidents. And let me address that, Aaron. Recently, when I appeared with Michael Sala on his podcast, somebody said, well, you said, Andy, you and your father visited the future and you were going to be president. That's not what happened. I said my father and I went down to Socorro, New Mexico, and we kind of saw like a video drone of the future, and we saw scenes of me being president on some timeline in the future. I never stated that ipso facto I was destined to be president. I also shared the second truthful data point about this issue. For years I was telling that, even before I ran, that in 1980, when Barry Soetoro and I were among the young Americans being trained to go to the Red Planet, he and I, Barry and I, he later to call himself Barack Hussein Obama, were being told that we were future presidents. That's all I said. I never predicted that, therefore, ipso facto, I had to be president. If that timeline doesn't eventuate, then what am I? I'm just another American who made their shot at it, like the great Hubert Humphrey, like the great Edmund Muskie, like the great Governor George Pataki, and didn't win, like the great Al Gore. I mean, look, it's no skin off your nose if you run for the office of president and you're not elected. That's being in the arena, as President Theodore Roosevelt stated, to know the sweat of the arena on your brow, not to sit on the sideline and throw pot shots at men and women courageous enough to enter the arena. And that's what I did in 2016. I don't think I'll ever do that again. As I've already stated, I may run for the U.S. Senate at some time in the future. But I ran and I didn't win. Big woof. I never predicted that I would win. I just said I was told I was going to win in the future. Maybe they told me so that I would help Barack Obama win or something like that. Okay? So I really have to protest this pattern of misquoting myself and even my statements about my late father, who's now been gone for 32 years. And therefore people derive these apparent proofs that somehow I wasn't sharing the truth. Why, as a distinguished member of the Washington Bar, would I make an unsupported statement of being elected president and then run and not win and think I did anything good for my career? I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. I ran because I thought I could be a good president, because I love my country, and I had good ideas, 100 of them.
Yeah, great.
And that's what they were lauded as when I ran. So that's what I did. And wherever you are, that's where you are. Okay? Let's go back to being there with Peter Sellers, right? Chance the gardener becomes Chauncey Gardner. Okay? That's what we can all do. People can be, as President Kennedy said, as big as they want. And he also said, everybody can make a difference and everybody should try. And that's what I was doing in 2016.
Yeah. There was another presidential hopeful who now has passed away, who was running as an independent, who made a brief splash and who was also on Mars with you. And that was the famous chart guy. The guy who was running for president, the businessman from Texas. What was his name again? I can't remember his name.
Aaron, I must tell you, I'm drawing a blank here.
So he ran for president. He didn't win, or he was going to run. He had all these charts, and he was kind of a short, kind of a thinning-haired guy, and he had a lot of ideas, and he was going to run for president. Gosh, what is his name? And he was on Mars with you. You had stated before that he was on the surface of Mars and actually was going to be...
Oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Ross Perot.
Ross Perot, yeah, Ross Perot.
Right. Look. That's another aspect of Project Mars, right? That's probably worth mentioning. In addition to myself, I was with Ross Perot Sr. and Ross Perot Jr. If you're listening, I'd love to talk with you on the phone and share my experiences of your late great father on the Red Planet. He was a great American. He was part of sort of the U.S. Navy connection because he had gone to Annapolis, just like Jimmy Carter's CIA director, Admiral Stansfield Turner, was on the surface with us. Mm-hmm. So it was Ross Perot, Stan Turner. In fact, I thought when Stan Turner said hi to Bernie Mendez and I thought he was Peter Byrne, the Bigfoot hunter, because he had a kind of a safari suit and a cravat around his neck. And then also Mary Jean Eisenhower, the aunt of Laura Eisenhower. She would go on to be the president or director of the People-to-People Ambassadors Program that President Eisenhower started. And then the man who would later use the name Barack Obama and be elected president. But Ross Perot and I were among Americans who ran and didn't win. So what we can say is that they seem to be including young Americans and middle-aged Americans like Stan Turner and Ross Perot, who either were vying for national leadership or who had exercised it. So Ross and I were vying for the presidency. Mary Jean Eisenhower was evincing it by directing this important second-level diplomatic program that her grandfather, President Dwight David Eisenhower, had founded like a year before she was born. Ike founded that in 1954, and then Mary Jean came along in 1955. So she was exercising a kind of leadership. And then, of course, Obama would become president. So, yes, that was part of, apparently, their decision in sending Americans who were in their late teens, early 20s, and a couple at midlife, like 40, 45 years of age, to the Red Planet.
Wow. Wow. Fabulous.
Just as they were sending mainstream NASA personnel like William Cameron McCool and Dr. Ralph Kennedy Johnston Sr. I mean, Ken Johnston had direct contact with those going into space on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, and the Space Shuttle. And he was piloting the Sky Taxi, also known as the Hopper, that they were using on the Red Planet to rescue us if we were in trouble, like from predators. Mm-hmm. And he was the individual who took the photos of fossils on the moon out of NASA. So Ken Johnston is a hero of the secret space program and serving in it and telling about it of a major order, of the finest water. And then William Cameron McCool died aboard the space shuttle. So there were NASA personnel in Project Mars, but most of us were not NASA personnel. There was that Navy connection to many of us. I was shadow listed as lieutenant in the Navy while being having the badge of a special agent with the Naval Investigative Service. William McCool was a plebe at Annapolis. Ross Perot Sr. and Admiral Stansfield Turner had attended the Naval Academy. That was sort of the Navy imprint.
Wow.
Courtney M. Hunt, who was my second Mars training officer, was a CIA agent and once told me that he had reached the admiral level in the Navy. So there again, there's that intel agency, military branch officer status. That is actually how the American government maintains leadership by the executive branch with the legislature above them and the judiciary below them, but also created an intelligence community that serves the executive by making every intelligence agent an officer in a particular branch of the military. That's reality, okay? That's true history.
Wow.
And that's what those people embodied. So thank you for reminding me about the great Ross Perot. The things I remember about Mr. Perot is he just wouldn't look around when he was telling me stories on the surface. I would say, Ross, we've got to look around for predators. And I love your fascinating stories, and you're just a tall drink of water from Texas. But I really must admonish you that we need to look around. You say, oh, Andy, well, that's all right, man. I don't have to. I know I survived this. So he was quite a trip. And I feel very honored and that I also ran for the office of president, just as Ross did in, 1992?
Yeah. Wow.
Against George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton.
I think so.
When he ran for the Reform Party.
Yeah.
Just as I ran against Donald Trump and Donald J. Trump and Hillary R. Clinton as an independent candidate in 2016. I'm sure that the spirit of Ross Perot was looking over me and making that attempt. And listen, it's fun. It's great to participate in the give and take of the democratic processes of a free people. It's wonderful. I had so many great interviews, and the BBC interview was so penetrating. I shared with the British the fact, that as a distinguished graduate of their finest university, the University of Cambridge, I was just doing what past American presidents had done, like Abraham Lincoln, by founding the agricultural technical schools and making America the breadbasket of the world. President Theodore Roosevelt had achieved by founding the conservation movement, and President Eisenhower had done with the national highway system, which was done for reasons of military preparedness when all these interstate highways were built across all 50 states in the Union. And so I just, told the BBC, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to take the next leap in technical development on behalf of this great country by implementing teleportation. It's been around for 50 years. Well, back then it was 45 years, but I would say, almost 50 years when I ran in 2016. And they would say, but yes, but can we have that? And I would explain, well, yeah, if I'm a Londoner and I want to get to Sydney, Australia, I'd rather go in 5 seconds than in 24 hours on a commercial passenger plane. And the BBC understood what I was talking about. I was talking about a technology that had existed for almost 50 years that would modernize the world we were living in, just like Lincoln's agricultural colleges, just like TR's conservation movement, which President Clinton supplemented so wonderfully with even more national parks and forests and BLM lands. And then President Eisenhower achieved with all those great freeways out there that we can use to travel across this beautiful country. I mean, these were the things that really moved America forward.
Yeah.
And what I was calling for was to do the same thing.
We need to do that.
I was hoping that somebody I was running against that year would give one plank in their platform, but they didn't have any platforms.
Yeah.
And that's all of them. The only competitor of mine in that race who literally published a platform was Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. And I salute Senator Rubio for doing that. That was a platform. But he was my only electoral adversary who had a platform. The rest were saying, like kids say in junior high and high school, I'm Joe Bloggs, vote for me. I'm Joe Bloggs running for student council, please vote for me. That was basically what the 2016 race was about. And it was, quite frankly, juvenile and pathetic.
Well, and that's why I
and
thought you had
to raise the tenor of the campaign.
Well, I think you did, and I ranking number 6 at Patty Powers, and having that.
Yes, I made number 6. I made number 6, not number 6, but I made 6-1 odds at the online betting website, Patty Powers of Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah.
When John Forbes Kerry, the former senator and secretary of state, who was the Democratic standard bearer in 2004, was only polling 300-1 odds.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that not to brag, although I'm proud of that fact, Aaron, but to let all my fellow Americans know and remember that statement by President Kennedy. Everybody can make a difference, and everybody should try. And also his statement, a human being can be as big as they want. Who was I? I was Andy Basiago from Morris Plains, New Jersey. Sure, I got a couple fancy sheepskins educationally and legally along the way to my campaign, but I didn't have a party. I didn't have many dollars in campaign donations, but I still got 6-1 odds on the tote board at Patty Powers and about 25,000 votes in the half of the American states that I was listed as a write-in candidate. The problem basically was that most of the states, so the ones that even allowed write-ins, most of them required all these filing documents that I spent my whole time doing. And then some of my endorsers failed to send them to me in time, and I lost Arizona because of one of them who delayed sending me the endorsement affidavits and so forth. So what I learned in 2016 is that running for president is not something I'm going to do again. Even if my vision is restored and my renal function through the amazing bionic revolution that we're on the threshold of, I am not going to run for president again. I will run for the Senate, and if that leads to a request that I run for president or vice president, if nominated, I will run, and if elected, I will serve. But I am not going to seek the presidency ever again. It's not my bag, and it's not my bailiwick. It was frustrating because I couldn't engage the body politic of this country in an important discussion of our destiny. And what is a leader supposed to do? Are they supposed to lick their finger and stick it up in the air and decide which way the wind is blowing? Or are they supposed to point in the most admirable and honorable and and effective direction in the future and use their finger to point to where we should go. And that's why I admire the memory of President Kennedy so much. He embodied that, and he was killed.
Wow.
Okay? So we have to get our act together and realize, look, what we are facing in this country is far more serious than any American politician. It is our survival against evil factions that want to enslave and destroy us. Okay? So wake up, America. We are in our 11th hour. We need to come together as brothers and sisters and save this great dream known as the United States of America.
Yes. As you were talking there, I did a quick search and I got it up on the show here. Is some of your 100 proposals. One here, disclosing America's time travel technologies.
Yes.
Protecting the Sasquatch
We have to,
species.
because, Aaron, we want to implement teleportation because we want to occupy the field so that another country like the People's Republic of China doesn't implement teleportation on a mass scale first and be able to overtake us. It's part of the defense of this country. That's why I always said I was the team leader of Project Pegasus. That's what we called the adults on the project. They were known as team leaders. I am still on the project. I am still trying to implement my dad's dream of American and then global public teleportation. So just like hailing down a taxi in New York by a police officer, we can teleport around the world to prevent any other world power from seizing that technical advantage. I've been speaking out to protect this great country and the people of the world.
Yeah. It's maybe what we can do because we're always wondering, what can we do? We're just people. What can we do? Maybe we can write our representatives, email them, mention some of these technologies that you've mentioned. Say, look, this guy's been talking for 15 years about this technology. Why don't we make it public? So,
well, actually, for 22 years, in terms of phone calls, and about 20 years in terms of lectures and radio appearances. And also, we should make it clear to them, we're not talking about teleportation-based time travel.
Right.
Because mass time travel by mass people and mass timelines would lead to mass chaos. What we're talking about is teleportation in real time. With the option, if the DoD exercises it, to throw the switch and teleport into the future to protect us in the present from the staging base of the future, but primarily to teleport in real time. That's what we should implement to protect our country.
Yeah, I got your disclosing secret advanced technologies proposal up here, and do you mind if I read it?
Sure.
Okay. Here's what Andy said, disclosing secret advanced technologies. For 70 years, the U.S. government has been concealing advanced technologies because they might be socially, economically, or technically disruptive in nature. These technologies include the teleportation technology developed by DARPA's Project Pegasus. They may also include cancer cures. The government should begin a program to declassify and deploy this knowledge. The standard of technical disclosure should be what provides the people the best available technology. This will enable the United States to reclaim its mantle as the world's catalyst of applied science. Andrew D. Basiago for president. There you go. Beautiful.
Thank you, Aaron. And that's what I've essentially been encountering in the medical field since running in 2016. There's sort of a medical infrastructure, the major HMOs and hospitals and allopathic doctors. There's then always a group of pioneering, perseverant, productive, elusively clear-thinking innovators in medicine and applied medical technology. There's then kind of a third level, kind of like a gray area, where really amazing stuff exists, but some con men are essentially engaged in quackery and scams, suggesting that they have that medical technology. So in the third category, in the second category, we could put some of the amazing bionic things that are coming along, like artificial kidneys and contact lenses that send what the lens is looking at back to the optic nerve. And they have proved out. I've been in communication with those who are quite aware of those technologies. They either developed them or are reporting the existence of such technologies. In the third area, we have claims like the so-called med bed, where we have one person associated with the Canadian Strategic Intelligence Service has said they exist, but that they remain classified and have been kept in secret by the world defense departments of major nations. And then there's a group of scam artists who are saying that they're selling med beds by taking a standard mattress and box spring and putting some harmless and ineffective electromagnetic signals through the mattress. And so I would advise everybody to remember about those three sort of tiers of medical technological claims, and remember that at that third most exciting tier, that there's some really amazing things coming down the pike, but there's also con men who are stating that they have those technologies. The problem is that just like with time travel, many of the most advanced secret technologies have been weaponized. They've been made weapons of war inside the defense departments of the entire world. The United States, Russia, China, Britain, France, Japan, India, and so on. And, South Africa. And we have to stand up as citizens of the world and as the free people of different countries, and even as the oppressed people of different countries, and demand that as a man thinketh, so he is, as the Freemasons say. That, as my mentor Norman Cousins said, as long as we share positive information with each other, the human race will make it. We will win our trial in the universe. But the problem is that some of our greatest medical ideas are actually being held back, the very ideas and applications that will allow us to expand our lifespan to the sort of biologically ordained amount, which is 120 years. That's what Gwen and I have decided to live to. And we know it's going to last a long time, because I was shown when I was in Project Pegasus just what year it was when I passed away, and it's quite a long time from now, as well as when my beautiful life partner will be living with me. So what we're talking about is expanding the human lifespan to its biologically possible limit in this phase of life on Earth. Because remember, when the firmament fell to the earth and caused the great flood of Noah, a greater amount of solar and cosmic radiation reaches the earth, and that's what shortened our lifespan to 120 years. Now, there have been, of course, Chinese individuals who claim they've been living for 250 years, but when we investigated those claims, we found out that they had grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers by the same name, and they themselves had only lived about maybe 100 years eating Chinese wolfberries every morning. So we have to eat the right thing, because as you have observed brilliantly, Aaron, we are what we eat, as we were told as children. Yeah. And also, we have to expand the lifespan based on things like artificial organs. But they first have to be released by the defense departments of major countries, and they're not. They're being kept secret. And that is wrong. And that's what I was fighting as a candidate for U.S. president in 2016.
Yes. Excuse me. 100 awesome proposals. And I encourage anybody, just do a Google search, find one like I did. The one I have up right now is revealing the ET presence on Earth. Now they're coming close on that. I tend
to. Also, I might add that I would salute President Biden, that after losing his son Beau Biden, he announced that he was going to, do a full court press on cancer, So that's what I was calling for, and I actually called for that in that proposal. Just as I made other proposals that President Trump implemented. I did have some effect on President Obama because he went from making fun of us to 10 years later doing another appearance on the Stephen Colbert Show where he finally admitted that there was a secret space program. So look, just as President Kennedy said, and as I've said several times now during this broadcast, human beings can be as big as they want. I wrote President Obama and Trump on July 28th of 2020. And the result was that President Obama listened to what I had to say, that if he didn't come forward and was involved in the Mars project, Project Mars, he would go down in history as a liar. And he came forward and finally admitted that there was a secret space program. That was progress. In the case of President Trump, I urged him to declassify the American presence on the red planet, Mars, since 1964. And he at least mentioned going to Mars and had his son Eric mention it during the Wednesday and Thursday night appearances by Eric and then President Trump at the RNC. So by writing personal letters to those two presidents, one the most recent former president and the current sitting president in 2020, I changed their positions on the secret space program. So please cut me some slack. I don't want to become the Philip Klass of the secret space program. I've been advancing it by writing presidents, okay? So please cut me some slack.
You're
I'm
not
doing the honorable thing.
You're not the Philip Klass. You are the data bomb of the whole thing here, because you just,
In my book, I say I'm the Alan Shepard of the secret space program.
there you go.
Project Mars, because borrowing a page from his book, when I was standing there in the Ark in El Segundo waiting to go to Mars, I said, "Come on, Cord, light this candle."
Yes.
To Courtney Hunter, the CIA was controlling my departure via Ark to Mars, and he laughed with that rueful laugh that only a cigarette-smoking man from the CIA can laugh. Probably an inspiration for the cigarette-smoking man on the X-Files. Written by my brilliant friend and classmate Frank Spotnitz of UCLA and Chris Carter. And so what I'm just trying to share with others is that, look, if you believe something, write your member of Congress, write your state, the senator from your state, your favorite senator from your state, write the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense. These people have addresses. I know that Obama read my July 28th, 2020 letter to him because like a week later, he went on the Stephen Colbert Show and suddenly changed his position on the secret space program, admitting that it existed. When 10 years earlier, he made fun of us, his fellow astronauts who went to the red planet. So you can make a difference, and everybody should try.
Yes, everybody should try. Everybody should try. Yes. Wow. Yeah.
Remember, as Buckminster Fuller said, it's easy to criticize others, it's easy to be negative, but it takes more energy, more soul force to do what's positive. So if we're going to save this country and this planet, we have to focus on being positive, looking forward and fighting for what affects everybody. Our lives, our destiny aboard this spaceship Earth. That's why I discussed the apparent assassination of singer John Denver during a previous episode of The Quest for Truth. John Denver was a paragon of such consciousness. He knew the direction we needed to go spiritually, intellectually, socially, politically, environmentally. And he created beautiful songs to get us there, like Calypso.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to laud John and also bear witness to what I'm afraid could have been his assassination. We have to be people like that. He's certainly somebody that's worth imitating.
Yes.
When I was writing for the Cousteau Society, John, as I mentioned during that show, what was it? He was bright, friendly, warm, humble, intelligent, informed, positive, bursting with ideas, participating in the now. That's the way to be, man. He knew what it's going to take. I'd love to see, a statue of John Denver on the Capitol Mall, just like that statue they put in of Dr. King. Let's honor these great Americans, not forget them, and try to be like them.
Yeah.
Not to imitate them, but to do what they understood we all need to do to make it as an American people and as the people of Spaceship Earth.
Yes. Very good. Very good. Very, very good. And the chat here, I have to say, when I had a hard time thinking of Ross Perot's name, right after you remembered it and you mentioned it, that's when the time lag stopped, and a lot of people in the chat knew who I was talking about. So we've got a very intelligent chat people here. So
I had a couple of contacts with Ross Perot Sr. on the surface. He was, a nice fellow, well met. He was a big piece of Texas.
Yeah.
He was a storyteller. He was very animated, very funny, very vociferous. It was hard to get a word in edgewise, but he was quite a character. And it was kind of a treat to see him run under the Reform Party ticket for president in 1992. But that's life. Everybody plays their part.
Yeah.
That's the way the American system is structured.
Yeah. And I think that by him running, and then by eventually Trump coming from a non-political background into the presidency, it really that illustrates the way that it's supposed to be. The way that this system was designed was, okay, I've done my career, it's going pretty good. Now I'm going to devote some time to the country and work for my fellow man here, because that's the way you do it.
Aaron, my friend and colleague, Dr. Tomislav Hahn, wrote a brilliant PhD in history thesis for his PhD in history from USC, the University of Southern California, which I'm proud to report that this great friend and former colleague of mine was awarded shorter than anybody in the history of USC. He was given his PhD within 2 years of initiating his work on his thesis. Now, Tom's thesis was on the Athenian democratic roots of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the great founding documents of our of American government and nation. And what he concluded is that those who were supposed to be elected to leadership of the U.S. government, president, vice president, cabinet members, senators, members of the House, were supposed to exemplify what the Athenians of ancient Greece described as the aristoi. Now, did that word mean the aristocracy? No. There was a major debate that Tom discusses in the thesis, which I'm proud that, among others, he dedicated to me for helping him on it. He published it with a major publisher, 1,300 pages. Basically, the debate was exemplified, for example, in the debate between John Adams, who believed that meant the artificial aristocracy of wealth and privilege, but the opposing view of Thomas Jefferson, that it meant the natural aristocracy of virtue and talent. I'm happy to report that our uniquely American civilization chose the latter. That's why we built a Jefferson Memorial. There is no John Adams Memorial on the Capitol Mall in Washington, D.C. There's that beautiful Jefferson Memorial with the dome. Mm-hmm. It's on the nickel, right? Yeah. the back of the Jefferson nickel.
Yeah.
That's what we embodied as a country, the natural aristocracy of virtue and talent. Those were supposed to be the people we elected to government, not career politicians, not plutocrats, not military leaders, not any oligarchical collective of advantaged people, those advantaged with wealth, privilege, military power, et cetera, but the natural aristocracy of virtue and talent, what President Kennedy called the best and the brightest. I believe if we get back to that model, the whole controversy of the last 5 or 10 years, the controversies over the Obama administration, over the Trump administration, over the virus, the vax, the whole thing, the whole Marianne, will just settle out because we'll think, hey, what a great government we have. We have the best and the brightest people in America in it, the best physicians and college professors and mothers of children and scientists and mathematicians and historians and political scientists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, those who are natural leaders in their communities will trickle up to the top and will think, hey, we can go to bed tonight and sleep without worrying about our leadership because we've got the best and the brightest, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to be in a war, you want to be behind the right general or the right captain so you survive in your foxhole or in your tank, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem with America. What we have been having for quite a number of years, and I don't want to be specific because everybody has their own liberal and conservative and Democrat versus liberal commitments and pretensions and beliefs. But the bottom line is that I challenge anybody to state that we have had a truly bright American president since President Kennedy, the best and the brightest. And I don't mean the most handsome. I don't mean the richest. I mean those with the most grasp of true history, those with the most grasp of where to go, those with the most grasp, the most moral imagination, pointing the direction in which we should pursue our future. That's what we need to start electing again. We haven't been.
Yeah.
We haven't been.
Well, I think it's starting. A lot of normal Americans are running for office. You know, when you were talking about that, it's like, well, who does our system entrust to decide our innocence or guilt? It's a peer, our jury of our peers. So those same jury people should be the people running for office as well, just ordinary people who are good and have good ideas. So that's.
Well, what about extraordinary Americans who, like all of us, began as ordinary Americans?
Yes, yes.
Not from the artificial aristocracy of wealth and privilege,
right?
And just happened to go onto the Ivy League or something, even if we weren't even born here, right? Versus those who worked their way up and did incredible things and were creative and productive and busy during a good 30 or 40 years professionally, and then become president, become senator, become member of House at like 60 or 70 years of age, let's say. That was the model that our framers intended.
Yeah.
And it's my belief that we're falling short of that.
Yeah. And
that we can do it again. And let me just tell you how nonpartisan that point is. It's not just a bipartisan issue, it's a multi-partisan issue because some of those individuals have been insisting in running with third parties and just as independents. I am a lifelong Democrat. I first worked for a Democratic candidate for president in 1968 when I was 7 years old. And I went door to door for Hubert Horatio Humphrey, the vice president to President Johnson. And Hubie didn't win. But I went door to door asking people to vote for Hubert H. Humphrey. And yet, who do I admire among recent senators? What about Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Was he not totally in sync with the rest of us about at least considering what the vaccines were and what they would do to us? Wasn't that responsible leadership? Was that really a partisan issue?
No.
Where it involved all of our health and all of our survival, even our prophylaxis and prevention of a major pandemic? Of course not. It's what our leadership should be doing. And even though he's Republican, and even though he has left the Senate, I salute a Republican Senator, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. That's the kind of senator I would like to be.
Great guy.
Whether I run as a Democrat or a Republican or as an independent, it doesn't matter. What matters is we get the best and the brightest in there who can ask the questions and do the things that need to be asked and that need to be done. That's what we need. None of this bickering. This bickering has just made me sick.
Right.
Like I said, I'm having trouble eating my Special K with blueberry every morning. Sometimes with what? Vanilla almond or cinnamon pecan. And usually blueberry. Okay, I'm eating that Special K every morning for protein, right, and fiber. And I want to enjoy it. So my fellow Americans, would you stop sickening me in the morning by all this stupid bickering? We've got major adversaries out there who are planning not only on attacking us, but replacing us on our own lands. We have to come together as one and defend this country and defend the free world. Because we are, as Lincoln said, President Lincoln said, the last best hope of humans on Earth. And it doesn't come down to all this bickering.
Right.
Would you please get off the cases of people who have served? Do you realize how hard it is to serve in these capacities? There's one president, one vice president, one cabinet secretary of that position, 2 senators per state, and only 1 member of the House for every congressional district based on population. That is a mighty responsibility for anybody who is elevated to those positions. Would you please get off their case and just move on? Okay, moveon.org, as I like to say. We're wasting our time on this constant back and forth between liberal apparatchiks in the mainstream media and conservative apparatchiks in the alternative media. It's just a constant bickering. Okay? It doesn't work. It's not effective. It's not constructive. And we have to move beyond that style, that paranoid, reactive style of American politics, as defined by the author Richard Hofstadter. It's not working. And we are in trouble as a result. Yeah.
Well, but,
you know, this week I spoke to a bus driver who was simply asking students from different backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, to sit down, put on their seatbelts, and look forward, because that's the law in all 50 states when you're on a bus.
Yeah.
And he was accused by their parents of being a racist.
Oh, boy.
I mean, come on. That was a bus driver.
Yeah.
He's telling me that a bus driver can't keep kids on his school bus safe without being called a racist. I mean, we are comparing apples to oranges so much in the civilization here in America that we are in danger of losing it. Okay?
Yeah, I think mainstream media is guilty of pushing this division. And I think the more that we can turn off the TV and turn on the intranet and get some real knowledge, and not just what they're force feeding the population, because we know it's
yes, but I would add to that the caveat, Aaron, that in the blogosphere it has to be reliable sources in the blogosphere, like Forbidden Knowledge and other excellent websites. It cannot be any wackadoodle claiming something on the internet, because what do they do to prominent Americans and world citizens? They make up false claims of atrocity. That doesn't advance the common weal.
No.
Oh, this person's running for such and such office. Yeah. Well, a wackadoodle is saying X, so it has to be believed because it's on the internet. So we're not talking about any reporting in the blogosphere.
Right.
We're talking about ordinary Americans serving as tribunes of the truth, because, as you said, the mainstream media is not doing so. It's always biased.
Right.
It always has an ideological axe to grind.
Right.
I absolutely agree, but I would just caution you that a lot of what's posted on the internet is just absolute nonsense. It's just made up by wackadoodles.
Except on the Quest for Truth and Truth Quest, those 2 shows are really, really good. I highly recommend them.
We rock.
Yes, we do. Yes,
indeed,
we do.
Absolutely.
And there's really is. In fact, a friend of mine was telling me the other day that she's got so many notifications coming in from the shows that she wants to watch. She doesn't have enough time in the day to watch them all. And that's how many alternatives there are if you really look at the things you're interested in. So,
Right, and Aaron, what letter value are we carrying? The letter A, that of the pioneer. So everything is connected to everything else. So if we continue to be pioneering and getting true history and true reporting published in at least enough successful website and podcasts on the internet, we're going to make it. The truth cannot be repelled.
right.
I think it was, who was it? It was like Poincare or some famous French physiocrat. No force in the universe can repel an idea whose time has come. Mm-hmm. That's the best of the alternative media. That's why I would salute Governor Ventura, Jesse Ventura, for launching conspiracy theory. But then after truthfully reporting on me for an hour, he got up and read this mealy-mouthed, untrue statement about me by the producer Michael Braverman, that I was a victim of government mind control. Governor Ventura, I wasn't a victim of government mind control. You had no evidence of that based on interviewing me, on camera or off.
Wow.
In fact, I had worked with several of the Manhattan Project physicists on time travel. Yeah. So please go back and address the fact that as a former Navy demolitions expert, not a Navy SEAL, Governor Ventura, but a demolitions expert for the Navy.
He's Frogman, yeah.
You stated at the beginning of conspiracy theory that you were a former Navy SEAL, and that was not true, Governor. But you also stated lies about me, and that I resent even more about the lie you told about yourself. I was not a victim of government mind control. I was one of America's early time-space explorers. And you saw the evidence of that right on camera when that woman from that home I pointed out in White Rock, New Mexico, had heard of Dr. Harold M. Agnew and had heard of Project Pegasus. You helped prove my claims, Governor Ventura, and for that you should be congratulated, but not that attack on me that the redoubtable Michael Braverman wrote for you for somebody to try to damage my reputation for the truth and the fact that I was telling the truth.
Wow, that's well, congratulations on getting on the show, but that's too bad that had to happen that way, that he did that. That's
well, Jesse Ventura's a great character.
Yeah.
He said to me, "Oh, Andy, I know you're quite articulate describing all these various and sundry time travel devices. But when that red light goes on and we're being filmed, I want you to remember I'm not stupid, but I am from Minnesota." And then I said, when we were driving to one of the shoots, I said, Governor Ventura, one of the things I learned on Project Mars is that I'm a future president. So what might happen is you run for president and you ask me to run with you based on my truth campaign and the truth movement. Mm-hmm. And then you serve as president, and then I follow you. And he said, Andy, I can assure you that if I'm elected president with you as my vice president, you will soon find yourself president of the United States. Because when I'm elected, unfortunately, I will find myself something called a dead man.
Oh, wow.
And what I later found out about Governor Ventura, to his credit, and the truth about his service in this great country as governor of Minnesota, is that when he was elected governor of Minnesota as an independent, he and his wife were poisoned by somebody.
Wow.
And he was taken down to the eating room in the Minnesota state capitol area. He was taken to an eatery, and they said, Governor Ventura, see all these people here, like that lady over there serving tables? We're all CIA.
Wow.
And he was then poisoned, and his wife was poisoned.
Oh, my God.
So Jesse Ventura is one of those ordinary Americans you mentioned. He's not the brightest light in the American arsenal, but he is a good person, and he was searching for the truth on conspiracy theory. I just wish he hadn't allowed his quest for the truth to be vitiated by the untrue defamatory content forced upon him by his producer, Michael Braverman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I think the episode that he did really well was the one where he, as a marksman, tried to replicate what supposedly happened on that fateful day, November 22nd, when Kennedy was shot. He proved that you can't shoot as many shots off as what was heard with that type of rifle. It's just impossible.
Right. He did those excellent books in the truth movement by his co-author. His name is escaping. Was it like Dick Powell or Dick Weiss or something? Remember those books that Governor Ventura did?
Oh yeah,
they were good works.
Yeah,
and I think he was advancing the truth, and I think that's pretty rare at the gubernatorial level in this country.
Yeah, he was a very well-read guy, a very intelligent guy, and that's odd for a wrestler too. I mean, to be that into learning.
Well, he has a lot of native intelligence. I don't think he was the brightest bulb in the drawer.
Okay.
He didn't really understand what time travel was, and he ended up essentially ending his feature piece on me by lying about me and defaming me. But I don't think that I found out from a whistleblower inside his productions that those were sort of grafted onto his reporting of me by his producer, Michael Braverman. One of the guys who actually sat around the table with him on conspiracy theory, with Sean Stone and himself and others. So.
Wow. Well.
His son Tyrell Ventura,
right,
and everybody around the table. So, that's the problem with television production. It's so episodic, and the production method is so chopped up that sometimes malefactors will sneak defamatory, untrue content onto somebody's production to essentially slant the truth value of their reporting. Or they could be working as government apparatchiks all along by telling the truth and then doing something to discredit it. I hope that's not the case. The latter is not the case with Governor Ventura, because he did have a really bright aura, an aura that I hadn't seen since I holographically visited George Washington, General George Washington. So Jesse Ventura is a remarkable American, and he's certainly a fine person. Mm-hmm. But he did do me a disservice by defaming me at the end of that show. And to that I protest, because I've been telling the truth about things that really happened.
Yes. Yeah. Jim Janos is his real name. And I did get to meet him.
Well, not Jim Janos, but George James Janos.
I did get to meet.
So if he was elected, he'd be another George, like George Washington and the Bushes. He'd be our fourth George.
Yeah.
As president.
And I met him too. I gave him one of my games, Tetragon 2. So there's a data point that you and I both met.
Yeah, see, everything is connected to everything else. I passed Governor Ventura in like 2001 when I took the Arizona bar. He was just hanging out there being interviewed or something. I just walked right past him. I didn't know 11 years later I would, 10 years later I'd be interviewed by him on his show. But he was really quite kind. When we finished the shooting, he asked me whether that was me in the Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg. And I said, yep. That was me, and it was confirmed by the CIA to have been that after it was analyzed and found to be an image of me from 1863, even though I was born in 1961. So he was just blown away when he was looking at the picture.
Wow.
And next week on The Quest for Truth, on July 21st, same hour, we're going to go over that as part of the direct evidence by which I put forth actual evidence of my time travel experiences in Project Pegasus. The the proof that the Josephine Cobb image not only captures me, but an analysis of my facial physiognomy in that picture reveals that I was fading from view when it was taken.
Oh. Yes.
So Governor Ventura looked at that and said, so Andy, was this you? And I said, yep. And then he just got into his SUV and was driven away.
Wow. Well, maybe that.
So it was wonderful to film with him. I just wish that he had told the truth about me in ending that show. I mean, I really admired him as an independent force and an independent per se in politics. But I was crestfallen that somebody I admired so much defamed me after the end of a show in which he proved my claim.
Wow.
You know, you got to go with the truth when you prove it.
Yeah.
And he didn't, and that disappointed me.
Well, that's unfortunate. And now you are coming back next Thursday, the 21st. So people, mark your calendars. Wake the neighbors, get the kids, and bring them next with Thursday for another show with Andrew Basiago, where you're going to be talking about. What were you going to be talking about again?
I'm going to be presenting 10 pieces of hearsay evidence.
That's
I'll
right.
explain what hearsay is.
Right.
There's a lot of confusion about what hearsay is or isn't. And then 10 pieces of evidence that are not hearsay, nor even an exception to the rule against hearsay. They're what the law calls direct evidence that comes in as actual evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So I have constructed my proofs around both proofs that are real and factual and not made up and even scientifically based that are still hearsay because of the way they were delivered, but those that are also direct evidence because they were things somebody said or did or stated under the impress of a direct event that they were witnessing. And that includes me and other people. So I'll share about 10 proofs based on hearsay and then 10 based on direct evidence or actual evidence. And I'll say, anybody who says I'm lying, just try to explain these 10 pieces of actual evidence. They're not made up. You know, if
Excellent.
you see the man in the turtleneck sweater who's sitting at the defense table and robbed the bank, that's direct evidence. You can say, I saw Joe Bloggs robbing the bank.
Yeah.
That's how the law is structured. So I've done that, Aaron, so many times. I'm quite frankly kind of sick of sharing it. But because there's been such a demand for those proofs, let's focus on Project Pegasus proofs on that show next week, July 21st.
Awesome. Project Pegasus proofs next week. You're going to hear it here from Andy himself. And I think, Andy, we're almost to the 3-hour mark, and that's the amount of time you wanted to spend on this show. So I think it'd be a great time to maybe put a cap on this and have everyone rush on back next week. What do you say?
Aaron, deal. Listen, as Ben Franklin said, make the most of time because time is what life is made of. So I think we've come to the limit of time today. I thank you for this, and I thank our listeners because together we're going to make it as a uniquely American civilization, and together we're going to lead the world into a better age, the time-space age, where, among other things, we will take care of everybody aboard our planet. And that was the purpose for which our nation was founded as the fulfillment of the Enlightenment.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andy, and good night.
Good night, Aaron.
Good night.